Hey guys, today we're going on a whispered journey. A soft, sleepy expedition into the very fabric of reality, or at least, how we perceive it. Imagine you're tucked into your coziest spot, the lamplight casting long, dancing shadows on the wall, and the world outside is a muffled hum. You pull that plush blanket up to your chin, feeling the warmth seep into your bones, and your eyes drift to that old map hanging on the wall, perhaps of some fantastical land, or maybe just your own hometown. It looks so neat, so ordered, so true. But here's the sneaky little secret, a reality check that might just unravel your sense of geographical certainty. Every single map you've ever looked at, from the intricate ancient scrolls to the glowing GPS on your phone, is lying to you. Just a little. You probably won't survive this revelation with your geographical innocence intact. But don't worry, it's a gentle untruth, like finding out your favorite childhood cartoon character actually wore mismatched socks. You see, the core of the deception lies in a simple, unavoidable truth. The Earth, our magnificent, swirling home, is a sphere. Or, more precisely, an oblate spheroid, which just means it's a bit squished at the poles and bulges at the equator, like a slightly overinflated yoga ball. And maps, bless their flat, two-dimensional hearts, are inherently flat. Trying to flatten a globe onto a piece of paper without stretching, tearing, or distorting it in some way is about as easy as trying to iron a crumpled piece of tin foil perfectly smooth without any creases. It simply can't be done. The moment you take that curved surface and force it into a plane, some part of it has to give. Lines stretch, areas bulge, and angles get bent out of shape. It's not malice, it's just geometry. This fundamental transformation, known as projection, is the mapmaker's necessary magic trick, and it always comes with a cost to accuracy. It's like trying to perfectly wrap a basketball with a single sheet of gift paper. You're going to have some crinkles and overlaps. Your map can preserve angles or areas or distances, but never all three at once. It's always a compromise, a quiet whisper of, "Look, I tried my best, okay?" Think of the famous Mercator projection, probably the map you picture when you hear the word world map. It's brilliant for navigation because it keeps lines of longitude and latitude straight and parallel, which is super handy if you're a 16th century sailor trying not to crash into France. But the price you pay? Distorted landmasses, especially as you move away from the equator. Greenland, that icy chunk up north, appears absolutely massive, almost the size of Africa. But if you were to actually lay Greenland over Africa, you'd quickly find that Africa is roughly 14 times larger. That's like your friend telling you they caught a pretty big fish, and it turns out to be a goldfish when they promised a shark. It's not a malicious lie, just a very practical one. Beyond the mathematical necessity of projection, maps also lie by omission and simplification. Imagine trying to cram every single tree, every single blade of grass, every single pebble, and every single squirrel into a map of your local park. It would be an unreadable mess, a chaotic tangle of lines and symbols. So map makers simplify. They generalize coastlines, smooth out jagged terrain, and represent entire forests with a few green blobs. This is why a tourist map of Paris will highlight the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre, but probably won't show the exact location of every single overflowing bin or charmingly questionable street performer. It's a carefully curated reality, a highly edited Instagram feed of the world, designed to serve a specific purpose. If maps told every single truth, they'd be useless. They'd be the world itself, which, while wonderfully accurate, is terribly hard to fold up and stick in your pocket. Historically, This gentle deception has been a part of map-making from its earliest days. You see, the very first maps weren't necessarily about precise navigation as we know it. For instance, the earliest known map-like representations date back thousands of years, to places like Saddle-Huruk in ancient Anatolia, showing what might be a town plan or volcanic eruption. But the Greeks, with their love for logic and geometry, made some of the first systematic attempts at mapping the known world. A mainstream historical fact is that Anaximander of Miletus, way back in the 6th century BCE, is credited with creating one of the earliest world maps, a simple, circular disk with Greece at the center, surrounded by the known lands and then the ocean. His understanding, of course, was limited to what was explored at the time, meaning vast swathes of the globe were simply not there or were speculative. And speaking of speculative, here's a quirky tidbit. Some very early maps, particularly from the European Middle Ages, weren't just missing continents. They included fantastical creatures and biblical narratives. Take the Teo maps, for instance, where a T-shape divided the world into 3 continents: Asia, Europe, Africa within a O-shaped ocean, often with Jerusalem at the literal center of the world, and Asia always on top, representing the east, the direction of the rising sun. These maps weren't just practical navigation tools. They were reflections of theological and philosophical beliefs. You might find dragons lurking in the unexplored oceans, or Adam and Eve chilling in the Garden of Eden right there on the map. It's like a medieval GPS that occasionally suggests you take a detour past a sea monster's lair. Historians still argue whether these seemingly inaccurate maps were primarily spiritual and cosmological representations, intended to depict the divine order of the world, or if they were indeed attempting to convey geographical information, albeit within a very different cultural framework. The lines on the map weren't just about where you were, but where you stood in the grand scheme of things. So, as you snuggle deeper into your pillows, consider that map on your wall. It's a wonderful tool, an indispensable guide, a beautiful piece of art, and a quiet storyteller. But it's also a gentle fibber, a necessary liar, simplifying the vast, complex, squishy reality of our planet into something manageable, something that fits on a screen or a sheet of paper. It doesn't lie to mislead you, but to help you. It's like when your parents told you that the boogeyman wouldn't get you. Technically a lie, but it helped you sleep. The lines and colors are approximations, interpretations, and sometimes charming little fabrications, all for your benefit. And in that quiet understanding, as your eyelids grow heavier, lies a deeper appreciation for the art of navigation and the subtle, inherent untruths that guide us across the world. After section 20, add the 300-word wind down, see below, and finish with sweet dreams. You feel that subtle hum in the air, that almost imperceptible tremor in the fabric of reality when you unfold a map, a vast, flat expanse of paper that promises to show you everything. It's not just the ink drying or the paper creasing. It's the quiet scream of a sphere, forcibly flattened, desperate to regain its curvaceous dignity. You see, the very first, most fundamental lie a map tells you isn't even about borders or names, but about its own nature. It's a spherical world, my friend, crammed into a 2-dimensional straitjacket, and trust me, it's not happy about it. Imagine trying to iron out a basketball into a perfectly smooth pancake. Impossible, right? You'd get tears, stretches, bulges, utter chaos. That, in essence, is the cartographer's eternal dilemma. Our beautiful, lumpy, rotating home is a spheroid, an almost perfect sphere if you discount the mountains and oceans and your uncle's unusually large head. and to represent that three-dimensional object on a flat piece of paper, or indeed, on your phone screen, you have to project it. This act of projection is where the first, unavoidable fibs creep in, subtle as a whispered secret in a quiet room. Every single flat map you've ever seen is a compromise. It has to be. You can preserve some characteristics, like true area or accurate shapes or correct distances or consistent directions, but you can never, ever preserve all of them simultaneously. It's like trying to get a toddler to share. Someone's going to end up crying. So cartographers, bless their geographically minded hearts, pick their poison. Take the famous, or perhaps infamous, Mercator projection. Devised by Gerardus Mercator in 1569, this was a revolutionary tool for navigators. You could draw a straight line between 2 points on the map, follow that compass bearing, and theoretically you'd get there. For sailing ships braving the high seas, this was gold. It meant you didn't have to constantly recalculate your heading. This was a mainstream historical fact, a genuine game changer for exploration and trade. But here's the catch, the polite untruth. To achieve this navigational accuracy, the Mercator projection drastically distorts areas, especially as you move further away from the equator. Think about it. Greenland on a Mercator map appears roughly the same size as Africa. Now, pause and let that sink in. Africa is, in reality, over 14 times larger than Greenland. You could fit Greenland into Africa 14 times and still have room left over for a small European country or two. Perhaps even your cousin Bari's garage band. Yet on this map, they're practically twins. Canada and Russia also inflate to monstrous proportions, making it seem like the entire northern hemisphere is engaged in some kind of geographical bodybuilding competition. This spatial exaggeration, while making navigation straightforward, quietly whispers tales of disproportionate power and landmass that simply aren't true. It's like your friend who uses a wide-angle lens for selfies, and then wonders why their nose looks like a small mountain range. This inherent distortion has led to fascinating, sometimes heated, discussions. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of the Mercator projection subconsciously influenced geopolitical perceptions, fostering a Eurocentric view of the world where northern, often colonial, powers appeared physically larger, and by extension, perhaps more dominant than their equatorial counterparts. Was it an innocent technical choice, or did it subtly reinforce existing power structures? The debate continues, a quiet hum in the ivory towers of academia. Now for a quirky little tidbit. While Mercator was busy stretching Greenland, there was a whole host of other projections being developed, each with its own peculiar quirks. Have you ever seen a Dymaction map? It unfolds like an origami octahedron, designed by Buckminster Fuller, aiming to show Earth's landmasses as almost one continuous island, minimizing visible distortion by breaking up the oceans. It's brilliant, it's mind-bending, and it looks like the instructions for assembling an alien spacecraft. Imagine trying to explain directions to your Uber driver using one of those. Yes, turn left at the continental crease, then right past the Antarctic flap. You'd probably arrive at your destination via a quantum wormhole. It's a testament to the endless, often bizarre, ways cartographers have tried to wrestle the sphere onto a page. The trick, of course, is that no matter what mathematical wizardry you apply, you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you preserve area, you often distort shape. If you keep shapes true, distances warp. Consider the polar maps you sometimes see, used for airline routes. They might center on the North Pole, showing great circle routes as straight lines. Fantastic for aviation, but try to use one to figure out the distance between, say, Buenos Aires and Sydney. You'd need a degree in astrophysics and a very long piece of string. Even the very act of defining flat Earth in ancient times wasn't always about a literal pancake. Some ancient cosmologies, which we now lump under the flat Earth label, conceived of a disc-shaped world or a world within a dome. The challenge of representing a curved surface on a flat medium was, in some ways, addressed even then, albeit through mythological rather than mathematical means. They flattened their known world into a digestible, understandable shape for their scrolls and tablets, just as we do today with our GPS apps, albeit with slightly more complex algorithms. When you pinch and zoom on your smartphone map, you're not seeing the real world. You're seeing a highly sophisticated, constantly recalibrating projection. Your phone, in its pocket-sized omniscience, is performing lightning-fast mathematical acrobatics to translate the curved GPS signals from satellites into the flat, rectilinear grid you see. It's a miracle of modern technology, yes, but it's still a miracle built on calculated deception. Every time you navigate, you're implicitly agreeing to these tiny, necessary lies. It's like accepting that the small popcorn at the cinema is actually enough to feed a family of 4. You know it's not really small, but it's convenient. So, as you drift off, consider the maps on your wall, the ones in your books, even the digital ones that guide your commutes. They are not mirrors of reality, but carefully crafted interpretations. Each line, each shade, each stretched continent is a silent echo of a cartographer's choice, a mathematical dance designed to serve a particular purpose, even if that purpose means sacrificing a little bit of the truth. It's not malicious, you understand, just pragmatic. A necessary deceit, if you will, to make sense of our magnificent, unruly sphere. And isn't that just a little bit charming? That even our most trusted guides to the world carry a secret, benign untruth within their very folds. Gridding the globe, Lines of Lies, we'll explore how the seemingly objective grid of latitude and longitude is an entirely human construct. You're drifting now, aren't you? Your mind, I mean. Away from the subtle squishing and stretching of continents that we talked about, the inevitable distortion of the spherical world forced onto a flat page. Imagine, for a moment, that you're not just a passive listener nestled in your bed, but an early explorer standing on the deck of a creaking wooden ship, far from any discernible land. The wind whips your hair, the salty spray kisses your face, and above, a vast, inky canvas of stars twinkles with indifferent brilliance. You've got your sextant. You've measured the height of the North Star, calculated your latitude with what feels like surprising precision for a piece of brass and glass. But where, oh where, are you east or west? This, my friend, is where the lines of lies truly begin to entangle us. Because unlike the fixed celestial points that help define your north-south position, those lines that crisscross maps, the ones we call latitude and longitude, aren't natural boundaries. They don't exist out there, etched into the ocean's surface or strung between mountain peaks like some cosmic laser grid. No, they are entirely, beautifully, stubbornly a human construct. Think about it. There's a perfectly good, naturally occurring equator, right? The point halfway between the north and south poles, where the Earth bulges ever so slightly from its daily spin. That's a natural starting point for our north-south measurements, our lines of latitude, those comfy horizontal bands that let us know if we need a parka or sunscreen. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we discussed? You'd certainly need it if you were near the equator, whether you knew your precise latitude or not. But for east-west, for longitude, there's no natural equivalent, no prime meridian etched into the planet by some cosmic cartographer. Just an arbitrary decision, a line drawn in the sand, or rather, through an observatory in Greenwich, England. You might have the most precise GPS coordinates beamed directly to your brain, telling you your exact latitude and longitude down to the last decimal point. But if you're standing on the deck of a ship slowly being swallowed by a colossal squid, knowing your exact position probably won't improve your survival chances much. Maps, you see, are great for finding places, less so for escaping mythical sea monsters. The idea of longitude itself, pinning down your east-west location, was a monumental problem for centuries. Sailors could determine their latitude relatively easily by observing the sun or stars, but longitude was a nightmare. They'd often rely on dead reckoning, guessing their position based on their starting point, direction, and speed, which, as you can imagine, often led to them being, well, dead wrong. Entire fleets were lost, lives extinguished, fortunes squandered, all because no one could reliably tell how far east or west they were. It was arguably the greatest scientific and navigational challenge of its age, prompting governments to offer enormous prizes for a solution. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that changed everything. The problem of longitude was so pressing that in 1714, the British government established the Longitude Act, offering a reward of £20,000, an astronomical sum for the time, roughly equivalent to several £1,000,000 today to anyone who could devise a practical method for determining longitude at sea. Many brilliant minds, and quite a few eccentric ones, dedicated their lives to this pursuit. Some proposed using the precise timing of lunar eclipses or the positions of Jupiter's moons methods that were mathematically sound, but incredibly difficult to perform accurately on a pitching, rolling ship. The eventual hero of this story, a humble self-taught clockmaker named John Harrison, realized the solution lay not in the heavens, but in mechanical precision. He spent decades designing and refining a series of incredibly accurate marine chronometers, clocks that could keep precise time at sea, allowing sailors to compare local time, determined by the sun with the time at a known fixed point, like Greenwich. The difference in time, knowing the Earth rotates 15 degrees an hour, directly translated into their longitude. His H4 chronometer, a watch about the size of a large pocket watch, was revolutionary. It lost only about 5 seconds during a 2-month voyage to the West Indies, far exceeding the required accuracy. Now for a quirky tidbit. Before the world largely settled on Greenwich, literally every nation, and even individual map makers, had their own idea of where the prime meridian should be. Some ancient Greek geographers used the Fortunate Isles, likely the Canary Islands, as their zero longitude point, believing them to be the westernmost edge of the inhabited world. Ptolemy, the influential Alexandrian cartographer, used a line through the Canaries too, but later, as geographical knowledge expanded, the line shifted. Renaissance mapmakers often picked their own capital cities, Paris, Rome, Madrid, or even Jerusalem, as their prime meridian, reflecting their own perceived centrality in the world. It was a cartographic free-for-all, making it incredibly difficult to compare maps or combine navigational data from different sources. Imagine trying to coordinate a global scavenger hunt if everyone started counting from their own front door. It would be chaos, delightful, dizzying chaos, but chaos nonetheless. The standardization around Greenwich was, in many ways, a testament to British naval and mercantile power in the 19th century. Historians still debate whether the global adoption of the Greenwich meridian was a testament to purely scientific consensus on its practicality, or merely a reflection of British imperial dominance at the time. Was it the best solution, or simply the most powerful nation's solution? Regardless, by 1884, at the International Meridian Conference in Washington, D.C., the Greenwich meridian was officially adopted as the prime meridian for most of the world. It was a compromise, yes, but one that finally brought order to the tangled mess of global positioning. So those neat, evenly spaced lines of longitude you see on maps, seemingly so objective and self-evident, they are, in fact, a whisper of a long-solved problem, a monument to human ingenuity, and a very precise, very useful, but entirely made-up line. You might even call it a very successful lie, don't you think? Colonial cartography, Power's pen. This part reveals how historical map-makers often redrew the world to serve imperial agendas and claims. You drift, perhaps, through the dusty, hushed archives of a forgotten empire. The air is thick with the scent of aged paper and dried ink, a silent testament to grand ambitions and quiet deceits. Before you, laid out on a heavy oak table, unfurls a vast, brittle map. It's an 18th century behemoth, perhaps of a continent barely touched by European boots, yet already crisscrossed with the elegant, assertive lines of imperial claims. You can almost hear the scratch of a quill, the hushed murmurs of strategists, the clinking of teacups as destinies are decided not by cannon fire, but by careful, precise strokes on parchment. It's a strange feeling, isn't it, to witness the birth of a world, not through natural forces, but through the deliberate, often self-serving artistry of a mapmaker. You, sitting here, probably won't survive the quiet revelation that many of the geopolitical boundaries that define our modern world were literally drawn by men who had never set foot on the soil they were so confidently dividing. Remember those invisible lines we talked about, the ones of latitude and longitude, the beautiful, comforting grid that promises order. Well, colonial cartography took those reassuring lines and weaponized them. Imagine, if you will, a group of powerful men in a dimly lit room, centuries ago, with a vast, unexplored landmass before them. Do they send expeditions to understand the local populations, the natural boundaries, the existing power structures? Sometimes, but often, the quickest route to claiming territory was to simply draw a line. A straight, uncompromising line that might bisect a mountain range, slice through a tribal homeland, or separate a river from its delta, all because it looked neat on paper. It was the ultimate long-distance land grab, executed with nothing more than a ruler and an inked quill. This, a cartographer might declare with a flourish, is where our colony begins, as if the mere act of drawing it made it so. One mainstream historical fact that perfectly encapsulates this is the infamous scramble for Africa in the late 19th century. European powers, driven by industrial needs and a thirst for resources, carved up an entire continent among themselves with astonishing speed, and little regard for the hundreds of existing African kingdoms and ethnic groups. Maps were not just representations, they were instruments of appropriation. Delegates would literally draw lines across maps of Africa during the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, delineating spheres of influence that would become the borders of modern nations. It was less about accurate geography and more about strategic advantage and avoiding conflict among themselves. It's a bit like dividing a pizza, where you get the biggest slice just because your pen works better, or you drew faster. And then there's the quirky, almost comedic, tidbit of paper partitions. The concept that some of these colonial borders were so hastily and ignorantly drawn that they created geographical absurdities. Think of villages suddenly severed from their wells, or nomadic peoples finding their traditional grazing grounds split between two different, often hostile, colonial administrations. There are even stories of maps being deliberately vague or having blank spots, not because of ignorance, but to leave room for future claims, like leaving a little space on your plate for dessert. Or, perhaps even more strangely, the persistent depiction of mythical lands or fantastical creatures on maps of newly discovered territories. These weren't just artistic flourishes. They sometimes served to inflate the perceived wonders and potential wealth of a region, attracting investment or deterring rival nations who might believe the sea monsters were real. Don't go there, dear competitor, for dragons dwell. A surprisingly effective marketing strategy for uninhabited lands. The inherent bias wasn't always about deliberate malice. Sometimes it was the unconscious projection of European perspectives. Indigenous place names were often ignored, replaced by names honoring European monarchs, explorers, or saints. Mountains, rivers, and entire regions were discovered and renamed, effectively erasing millennia of local history and knowledge. It was an act of cartographic conquest, asserting dominance not just over land, but over identity and narrative. You see this everywhere, from the Americas to Australia, where traditional names were systematically overwritten. Historians still argue whether the omission of indigenous settlements and agricultural lands from early colonial maps was purely due to a lack of survey data, or if it was a deliberate strategy to depict the land as terra nullius, or nobody's land. The latter interpretation suggests that leaving these areas blank or labeling them as wilderness provided a convenient justification for annexation, implying the land was uncultivated and therefore ripe for the taking. It's a very convenient oversight, wouldn't you say? Like forgetting to mention that the last slice of cake belongs to someone else. The scale of the map also played a subtle, yet powerful, role. Large-scale maps of a small, precise area, perhaps a newly claimed port, conveyed a sense of detailed knowledge and control, making the distant imperial power feel very much on the ground. Conversely, small-scale maps of vast, undifferentiated territories, perhaps labeled only with grand, sweeping names like British West Africa, served to minimize the complexity and diversity of the region, making it seem like a single, manageable entity ripe for administration. It's the cartographic equivalent of zooming in to show off your meticulous garden, then zooming out to gloss over the messy garage. Even the symbols used on maps reinforced power dynamics. Forts were prominently marked, trade routes emphasized, and areas of strategic importance highlighted, often at the expense of depicting the daily lives or societal structures of the indigenous populations. It wasn't just about showing where things were, but about showing where power resided and where resources could be extracted. It's a map that whispers, this is where we dominate, and this is what we want. And in the sleepy quiet, you can almost hear those whispers echoing through the ages, shaping the world you inhabit today. You're lying there, eyes gently closed, perhaps picturing that old, dog-eared map you had as a kid. The one with the slightly inaccurate coastlines, or the little town that seemed to shrink on the page compared to real life. It felt like a minor fib, a gentle embellishment, right? But what if those minor inaccuracies weren't so minor? What if they were deliberate omissions, strokes of a pen that didn't just bend the truth, but actively erased it? Imagine a map that, with quiet authority, simply pretends you don't exist. Not just your house or your street, but your entire history, your language, your very presence on the land you call home. This isn't some dystopian fantasy, you understand. This is the very real, often tragic, reality of how maps have been used throughout history to silence and sideline. Think back to those earlier discussions about how grids and projections subtly twist the world. Now, imagine a far more brutal twist, the complete removal of entire peoples from the official narrative of the land. It's a cartographic sleight of hand, where thousands of years of indigenous stewardship, vibrant cultures, and intricate land management systems simply vanish from the page, replaced by Latin script and a stark, blank space, or worse, by a new foreign name. And let me tell you, if your ancestry isn't from the dominant conquering culture, you probably won't survive this cartographic reality check unscathed. It's like discovering your family tree was drawn by a toddler who ate half the branches and then scribbled over the rest. Consider the so-called doctrine of discovery, a series of papal bulls and legal concepts from the 15th century that gave European Christian nations permission to claim lands not already inhabited by Christians. On a map, this translated to vast swathes of the globe simply being declared terra nullius, nobody's land, even when teeming with complex societies. It's an intellectual leap of faith that would make a trapeze artist blush, but it had profound, devastating real-world consequences. This wasn't just about drawing lines. It was about drawing a line through an entire way of life. The names of rivers, mountains, and valleys, honed over millennia by deep ecological understanding and spiritual connection, were swiftly replaced by the names of distant monarchs, saints, or expedition leaders who had just arrived. Imagine waking up to find your entire neighborhood renamed after someone you've never met, simply because they drove past it once. The land doesn't forget its true names, of course, but the maps certainly tried to make it. Before the European ships arrived, many indigenous peoples possessed incredibly sophisticated navigation, and mapping knowledge themselves often passed down orally, through song, or carved onto objects. Think of the Marshall Islanders and their stick charts, intricate latticeworks of shells and sticks representing ocean swells and islands, allowing them to navigate vast stretches of the Pacific with astonishing accuracy. Or the intricate pathways of the Aboriginal Australians, woven into songlines that are simultaneously spiritual narratives and detailed maps of their ancestral lands. Yet when the European cartographers arrived, with their sextants and their paper, these rich, nuanced ways of understanding and representing the land were simply ignored, deemed primitive or non-existent. It's like trying to explain quantum physics to a squirrel. He might look interested, but he's really just waiting for you to drop a nut. The very act of imposing a new grid, new names, and a new perspective on the land was a powerful assertion of dominance, a cartographic invasion that often preceded or accompanied physical conquest. This erasure extended beyond names and territories to the very presence of marginalized groups. Maps, by their nature, tend to simplify, and in that simplification lies a powerful opportunity for omission. Think of the roots of the enslaved. Millions forcibly moved across continents and oceans, their journeys etched into the fabric of human history, yet rarely explicitly mapped as a central feature of the world. You might see a shipping lane, but rarely the agonizing human cargo it carried. Or consider nomadic peoples, whose seasonal movements and fluid boundaries defy the rigid lines of conventional static maps. Their very existence challenges the idea of fixed borders and permanent settlements, so maps often simply ignore their presence, effectively rendering them invisible in the official record. It's a quiet violence, a cartographic gaslighting that tells people, "You were never here." Even within established nations, maps can subtly erase. Slums and informal settlements, bustling with life and community, might appear as blank spaces or generic, undeveloped areas on official city maps, their residents rendered spatially null. This isn't just about aesthetics. It's about access to services, political representation, and recognition. If you're not on the map, how do you demand clean water, schools, or police protection? This cartographic silence can perpetuate cycles of marginalization, making it harder for these communities to advocate for themselves. Remember how we talked about the Mercator projection stretching Greenland to the size of Africa? Well, this isn't just about size distortion. It's about existential distortion, making entire peoples vanish from the official representation of the world. The absence on the map becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of neglect. Historians still argue whether the erasure was purely an act of deliberate malice, a conscious effort to dispossess and dominate, or a more insidious consequence of cultural myopia and the inherent limitations of European mapping conventions. Was it always a conscious, power's pen at work, or sometimes just a cartographer's ignorance, too busy drawing dragons on the unexplored parts to notice the civilizations already there, or too preoccupied with grand imperial visions to care about the complex realities on the ground? The answer, as with most things history-related, is probably a bit of both. But the impact remains the same. A profound disconnect between the lived reality of many peoples and their representation on the maps that came to define the world. So as you drift off, perhaps consider not just what maps show you, but what they deliberately or inadvertently choose to hide. The silent stories waiting just beyond the printed borders. You feel the slight chill of evening air on your skin, a whisper that seems to carry the ghost of past empires. You're standing, imagine this, with one foot on a line. Not a painted line, not a fence, but an invisible boundary that, on a map, would appear as bold and unwavering as a freshly drawn pencil stroke. Yet out here, under the fading light, it feels soft ephemeral, like chalk on a vast, shifting desert dune. You learn quickly that those seemingly solid lines on a map, the ones separating nations, cultures, and sometimes even families, are far from the immutable truths they pretend to be. They are, in fact, often just agreements, inked onto paper, subject to the whims of politics, the thrust of conflict, and the quiet passage of time. You trace an imaginary finger along one of these theoretical lines. Perhaps it's a border carved by a river, its course slowly, imperceptibly changing year by year, inching territories away from one country and towards another with the lazy meander of water. Or maybe it's a line drawn across a mountain range, a jagged scar where one side speaks a different language, sings different songs, and sees itself as utterly distinct from the other. You might even find yourself on a street where the official border runs right through the middle of a cafe, creating a delightful absurdity where your coffee might technically be in one country while your scone is in another. It's like a perpetually unfinished game of Pictionary, where the lines keep getting erased and redrawn. I imagine cartographers back in the day, after a long week of drawing borders, just throwing their quills in the air and muttering, "Right, that's settled. Until Tuesday, anyway." Think of Africa. Not the Africa you see on a globe with its neat, almost ruler-straight lines carving up the continent like a pie. No, think of the Africa before those lines, a tapestry of kingdoms, tribes, trade routes, and fluid zones of influence. Then, in the late 19th century, specifically at the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, European powers sat around a table, thousands of miles away, and literally drew those straight lines. They sliced through ancient ethnic groups, combined historical enemies, and completely ignored the intricate social and political landscapes that had existed for centuries. This is your mainstream historical fact, by the way. The scramble for Africa, driven by European colonial ambitions, imposed borders that had devastating and lasting consequences, creating artificial states and contributing to conflicts that resonate even today. It was, if you think about it, the ultimate group project where nobody consulted the actual subjects. And what about the quirky, fringe tidbit? Imagine a place where those borders aren't just invisible, but utterly baffling. Picture the town of Barl, split between the Netherlands and Belgium. It's not just a town on a border, it's a town of borders. Barl-Nassau is Dutch, Barl-Hertog is Belgian, and within Barl-Nassau there are 22 separate Belgian enclaves. And within some of those Belgian enclaves there are even tiny Dutch exclaves. The lines snake through houses, restaurants, and gardens. A Belgian postbox might be just feet from a Dutch one, and if your doorbell is on the Belgian side of your house, but your front door is on the Dutch side, well, you're just living the Barl dream. These borders shift so fast, you'd think they were running on a beta version of the world. It's a cartographer's nightmare, but a fascinating example of just how arbitrary and, frankly, ridiculous these fixed lines can become when applied to a complex reality. You see, maps are designed to simplify to make the complex digestible. But in that simplification, they invariably, gently lie. They present permanence where there is flux. They show solid boundaries where there are often just contested zones, historical claims, and cultural overlaps that defy neat categorization. You're holding a map in your hand now, aren't you? And it tells you that this is one country and that is another. But what if you were to walk along that line in the real world? Would you feel the sharp division, or would you find that the changes are gradual, a slow blend of accents, cuisines, and customs? This subtle deception is why relying solely on a map can sometimes lead you astray, in ways both comical and perilous. You probably won't survive the paperwork, let alone any actual conflict, if you accidentally wander into a disputed zone because your map showed a clear, undisputed line. Good luck explaining to an understandably suspicious border guard that your GPS just insisted this was international waters, or that your map, printed back in the good old days, clearly shows this field as part of an entirely different sovereign entity. It turns out, drawing a straight line on a map is a lot like assembling IKEA furniture without the instructions. Looks easy, ends up wonky, and inevitably leaves you with a few extra pieces of international disagreement. Historians still argue whether the imposition of strictly defined national borders in post-colonial states exacerbated or merely reflected pre-existing tribal and ethnic divisions. It's a debate that highlights the profound impact of cartographic decisions on human lives, on migrations, conflicts, and the very concept of national identity. These lines, drawn with such authority, often failed to acknowledge the intricate, messy, and deeply personal connections people had to their land and to each other. They ignored the ancient paths of nomadic peoples, the shared use of resources, and the interwoven destinies of communities. The borders on a map are like snapshots of a moment in time, frozen and unmoving. But in reality, they are constantly breathing, contracting, expanding, or simply dissolving under the pressure of history, geopolitics, and human will. Think of how Poland's borders have shifted through the centuries, expanding and contracting like a tired accordion. Or how the collapse of the Soviet Union created a whole new constellation of independent states, each tracing new lines where none had existed for decades. The map you consult today might be utterly irrelevant tomorrow, or next year, or next decade, depending on the shifting sands of global power. These lines are not eternal, they are not natural, and they are certainly not always truthful representations of the lived human experience. They are, in their elegant simplicity, a convenient fiction. And knowing that, you can almost feel the gentle breeze rustling the edges of your map, reminding you that even the most solid lines are just temporary marks on an ever-changing world. You're floating now, perhaps, above those imaginary lines we just discussed, the ones that shift and shimmer with political whims. But sometimes, those lines aren't just about who gets to say mine. They're about what mine actually contains. Imagine, for a moment, the world spread out before you, but this time it's not just topography and political colors. No, this map shimmers, glints with a faint, almost imperceptible glow. Here, a vein of gold threads its way through ancient rock. There, a deep, dark pool of crude oil lies hidden beneath a desert expanse. Over here, the unmistakable blue-green hue of copper, or perhaps the subtle, almost invisible shimmer of a rare earth mineral, crucial for your smartphone, the very device you might be listening to this on. You see how these maps suddenly become less about pretty pictures and more about cold, hard cash. They transform into treasure maps, not for pirates and buried chests, but for nations, for corporations, for ambitions. These are the maps of greed, the cartographic blueprints for what we politely call resource wars. But what are, at their core, just very, very expensive arguments over who gets to dig up the planet's goodies. And frankly, if you were ever truly involved in one of these digging operations, the kind that might spark an international incident, you probably wouldn't survive the actual labor, let alone the geopolitical fallout. It's not all Indiana Jones, you know. Mostly, it's just dirt and very sharp rocks. Now, consider the scramble for Africa in the late 19th century. This wasn't just about waving flags and planting arbitrary borders, remember those shifting sands. No, this was a land grab fueled by the promise of untold mineral wealth. European powers, armed with their new detailed surveys, essentially, the most expensive treasure maps ever made carved up a continent. They weren't just drawing lines. They were drawing lines around diamonds in Kimberley, gold in the Witwatersrand, copper in the Congo. The maps, far from being neutral representations, became powerful tools of seduction and justification. They highlighted the perceived potential, often exaggerating it, and conveniently obscured the human cost. They made it look neat and tidy, like dividing up a particularly delicious cake, when in reality, they were carving up societies, cultures, and entire ways of life with the sharp edge of a ruler and a pen. Sometimes, the obscuring act on a map is even more potent than the highlighting. Think about maps of indigenous lands before colonial powers arrived. Often, these maps were rich with cultural significance, spiritual sites, and traditional hunting grounds, a living tapestry of connection to the land. But when the European cartographers arrived, their maps stripped away this nuance. They replaced complex, interwoven relationships with stark, simplified labels. Unexplored, wasteland, or simply blank spaces. These empty spaces, devoid of human presence in the eyes of the colonizers, made it easier to justify appropriation. After all, if no one's really using it, if it's just a blank spot on the map, then surely it's fair game for exploitation, right? This deliberate omission of existing resource management practices or the presence of valuable local knowledge was a powerful act of erasure, paving the way for resource extraction without moral qualms. A quirkier tidbit to consider: the guano wars. Yes, bird droppings. In the mid-19th century, the demand for fertilizer soared, and islands rich in accumulated bird excrement, guano, became incredibly valuable. Maps of the Pacific and Caribbean suddenly marked tiny, previously insignificant islets with strategic importance, not for their beauty or their indigenous populations, but for their deep, smelly deposits of nitrogen-rich bird poo. The Chincha Islands off Peru, for example, became a flashpoint for conflict, with Spain, Peru, Chile, and Bolivia all eyeing the lucrative white gold. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? A war over bird droppings. But it perfectly illustrates how even the most unusual resources, once recognized and highlighted on a map, can ignite fierce territorial disputes, proving that sometimes even the most innocuous-looking island can hide a fortune and a potential battlefield. And this brings us to a pervasive debate. Historians still argue whether the presence of a resource, or the mapping of that resource, is the primary driver of conflict, or merely an accelerant for pre-existing geopolitical tensions. Did the map create the desire, or did the desire simply find its justification in the lines and labels on the map? It's a chicken or egg scenario played out on a global scale, with devastating consequences. Take the oil fields of the Middle East. While oil was known to exist, the precise mapping and estimation of its vast quantities, coupled with the strategic imperative of industrial nations, fundamentally reshaped the political landscape, leading to interventions, alliances, and conflicts that reverberate to this day. The lines on these maps were drawn, redrawn, and fought over, often literally, because of the black gold pulsing beneath the earth. So when you see a map that seems to just show the land, remember the hidden agenda. Look closely for the subtle emphasis, the convenient omission, the gentle highlight that whispers, "There's something valuable here." Because beneath the serene surface of cartographic precision, there often lies the rumbling engine of desire, the silent promise of profit, and the distant echo of conflict. Maps don't just show you where things are. They tell you what to covet, what to fight for, and sometimes what to ignore entirely. They are, in essence, the silent strategists of humanity's most primal urges. You are now drifting deeper into the cartographic dreamscape, past those wobbly political borders and those conveniently highlighted resource zones, into a much more insidious realm. Imagine for a moment that you're not just looking at a map, but the map is looking back at you, whispering. It's not just showing you where places are, but where they should be, or even, crucially, what you should feel about them. You're stepping into the shadowy, often dazzling world of propaganda maps. Picture yourself, if you will, not in some grand, echoing archive, but in a cozy, slightly dusty attic. Moonlight filters through a grimy window, illuminating a stack of old, brittle paper. You pick up a large, unfolded sheet. At first glance, it looks like any other map. Lines, colors, place names. But then, your eyes linger. The borders aren't just lines. They're thick, bold, almost muscular, asserting an undeniable presence. One nation, perhaps yours, looms disproportionately large, its territory bleeding into what you thought were independent neighbors. Rivers flow not just from source to sea, but seem to carry the very essence of a nation's destiny. This isn't a map of facts. It's a map of vision, a meticulously crafted illusion designed to bend your perception, to subtly, gently, and relentlessly guide your opinion. You might think you're immune, that you're too clever for such visual trickery. But maps, my friend, have been playing psychological chess with your brain for centuries. You probably won't survive this without at least questioning the next globe you spin. Think of it as the original fake news, except instead of sensational headlines, it's all about a carefully selected coastline or an intentionally omitted mountain range. Propaganda maps are less about geographic accuracy and more about geographic persuasion. They manipulate scale, distort projection, remember our flat Earth problem, and wield color like a psychological weapon. A vibrant, expansive green might denote prosperity and fertile lands for our nation, while a muted, shadowed gray could represent a rival's barren, insignificant territory, even if the actual terrain is quite similar. It's the cartographic equivalent of making your little brother look tiny in family photos by always standing just a little bit closer to the camera. Take, for instance, the era leading up to World War II. Mainstream historical fact shows us how maps produced in Nazi Germany often depicted a greater Germany that stretched far beyond its actual 1930s borders, incorporating Austria, parts of Czechoslovakia, and even portions of Poland into a unified, seemingly organic whole. These maps weren't merely descriptive, they were prescriptive. They visually normalized the idea of Lebensraum, or living space, presenting territorial expansion not as aggression, but as a natural reclamation, a destiny drawn in indelible ink. The visual impact was profound, reinforcing the regime's narrative to both its own population and, crucially, to external audiences, attempting to soften the perception of their expansionist aims. It's hard to argue with a line drawn on a map, especially when that line has been meticulously rendered by an authority. This isn't just about showing bigger borders, though. Propaganda maps can also highlight perceived threats or internal struggles. During the Cold War, for example, maps from both sides of the Iron Curtain often depicted the opposing bloc as a creeping, overwhelming red or blue blob, poised to engulf the free world or liberate the oppressed masses, depending on your perspective. These weren't just geopolitical diagrams. They were psychological battlegrounds. The sheer visual weight of an enemy's encroaching influence, or the comforting blanket of your own ideology spreading across the globe, could shape public opinion more effectively than 1,000 speeches. It's like when you're trying to convince someone you're truly, utterly exhausted, and you lean just a little bit more dramatically onto the sofa. The map does the leaning for you. Sometimes the propaganda is so subtle, it's almost poetic. Consider maps designed to promote internal unity or national identity. A quirky tidbit from the early American Republic is how maps often emphasize the vast, unexplored interior, presenting it as a tabula rasa ripe for expansion and settlement, largely ignoring the vibrant, established indigenous communities already living there. These maps, while not overtly shouting, manifest destiny, certainly laid the groundwork for it by visually minimizing the presence and claims of Native American nations. It was a subtle cartographic sleight of hand, erasing entire peoples with the graceful stroke of a pen, making the unsettled lands appear empty and waiting. Historians still argue whether the primary intent of certain historical maps was purely informational or overtly propagandistic from their very inception. Was the intention truly to misinform, Or was it a more unconscious reflection of the prevailing geopolitical biases of the time? Were the cartographers themselves active participants in the deception, or merely cogs in a larger ideological machine, diligently drawing the lines they were told to draw? It's a fascinating chicken-and-egg question. Did the map create the ideology, or did the ideology create the map? Perhaps it's a bit of both, a symbiotic, self-reinforcing loop, where the visual representation solidifies the belief, which in turn demands more maps that support the belief. Think about how modern-day maps used in political campaigns might subtly exaggerate voter turnout in certain areas, or highlight demographic shifts to sway opinion, or how environmental maps might amplify the scale of deforestation in one region while downplaying it in another, all to serve a specific agenda. The principles haven't changed much from those old, dusty attic maps. The tools are just a bit more digital, a little slicker, and perhaps even more effective because they feel so undeniably scientific. It's like using a really fancy, expensive font for your slightly dodgy email. It just makes it seem more legitimate. So the next time you unfurl a map, any map, or even glance at your phone's navigation, pause for a moment. Look beyond the roads and the rivers. Try to discern the hidden agenda, the subtle persuasion, the silent whispering. Is it merely showing you a path, or is it trying to lead your thoughts down a very specific, carefully constructed ideological lane? Maps, in their quiet certainty, can be among the most powerful tools of influence, shaping not just our understanding of space, but our very perception of reality. They promise truth, but often deliver a meticulously curated version of it. Scale's secret, omitting detail. You'll understand why every map, by necessity, must leave out a vast amount of information, choosing what to highlight. You settle deeper into your pillow, the soft light from the bedside lamp casting long shadows across the room. You're holding a map in your mind's eye, perhaps an old, crinkled tourist map of a sprawling city, or a sleek digital rendering on your phone. You trace a finger along a street, a river, a park. But as you zoom in, or as your imaginary finger glides closer to the supposed reality, you start to notice something peculiar. Details begin to vanish. What looked like a solid green block of parkland on the map is, in truth, a riot of individual trees, winding paths, forgotten benches, squirrels plotting world domination, and maybe even a rogue frisbee stuck high in a branch. The neat blue line of a river hides countless eddies, submerged rocks, a family of ducks arguing about dinner, and the faint glimmer of a discarded soda can. The crisp gray line of a street. That's actually a pothole-riddled expanse of cracked asphalt, a bustling sidewalk, a traffic light stuck on yellow, and the distant siren of an ambulance. You see the very first secret, the most fundamental truth about why maps always lie, even just a little, is simply this. They must. If a map were to show everything, every blade of grass, every grain of sand, every individual brick in every single building, every single human being arguing with their partner about where they parked the car, it wouldn't be a map at all. It would be, well, it would be the world itself, crammed onto a piece of paper or a tiny screen. And honestly, trying to navigate that would be an existential nightmare. You probably wouldn't survive the sheer information overload, let alone find your way to the nearest coffee shop. Your brain, bless its overtaxed circuits, would simply melt. So every map, by its very nature, is an act of omission. It's a curated reality, a carefully selected list of important bits, with the vast, glorious, chaotic majority of existence left out. Think of it like a perfectly edited highlight reel of your life, where all the mundane moments, waiting in line at the DMV, trying to remember where you put your keys, accidentally microwaving a spoon, are simply snipped away. What you're left with is a compelling narrative, but it's far from the full, messy truth. The crucial question, then, isn't if details are omitted, but which details are chosen to be left out, and which are deemed worthy of inclusion. And that choice, dear listener, is where the gentle deception creeps in. It's a decision made by the cartographer, often influenced by the map's intended purpose, the prevailing political climate, or even their own biases and beliefs. For instance, a navigational chart for sailors will painstakingly detail depths, currents, lighthouses, and buoy placements. But it will largely ignore the subtle undulations of the land beyond the coastline or the precise location of a particularly charming pub on the shore. Conversely, a geological map, obsessed with rock formations and fault lines, might render major highways as mere faint suggestions, or ignore them altogether. This principle of selective omission has shaped map-making for centuries. Early cartographers, long before satellites and precise surveying tools, had to make monumental decisions about what to include based on incredibly limited information. They might have a rough sketch from a returning explorer, a vague account from a merchant, or even just hearsay. Consider the maps of the age of exploration. They often depicted vast swathes of terra incognita, or filled unknown regions with mythical beasts, towering mountains, or even just artistic flourishes. These were not deliberate lies in the sense of propaganda, but rather admissions of omission, a visual representation of what was not known, coupled with an artistic necessity to fill the void. Yet, even in their innocence, these omissions shaped perception, influencing future expeditions and colonial claims, inadvertently reinforcing the idea of empty lands waiting to be discovered and exploited. Perhaps one of the most delightful, albeit subtle, forms of omission as lie comes in the form of what cartographers sometimes call trap streets or paper streets. These are entirely fictitious roads or towns added to maps by publishers to catch anyone who might try to illegally copy their work. If another map appeared with their unique, non-existent street, they'd have irrefutable proof of plagiarism. It's a cheeky little cartographic fingerprint, a tiny, deliberate falsehood woven into the fabric of supposedly factual geography. Or consider the historical maps where smaller, less significant indigenous villages or pathways were simply erased, replaced by broad, unmarked wilderness, or worse, by the new names of colonial settlements. It wasn't always a malicious act of erasure. Sometimes it was merely a pragmatic decision to simplify an already complex visual, but the effect was the same. The lives and histories of countless people became invisible on the official record. Historians still argue whether the omission of specific routes or settlements by medieval European cartographers was primarily due to a lack of precise knowledge, a focus on pilgrimage routes and religious sites over mundane thoroughfares, or a subtle way of reinforcing dominant social structures by making certain areas literally unmappable for the general populace. Was it pragmatism or a quiet form of control? The answer, as with most things in the nuanced world of maps, is probably a bit of both. So, the next time you glance at a map, remember that you're not seeing the world as it is, but as someone, at some point, decided it should be represented. You're seeing the highlights reel, the executive summary, the distilled essence. Every clean line, every simplified shape, every labeled feature represents not just an inclusion, but 1,000 quiet, unnoticed omissions. It's this silent, necessary act of leaving things out that makes maps usable, but also perpetually, gently, fundamentally untruthful. They tell you just enough to get by, but they always keep a little secret for themselves. You lean closer to the flickering light. The lines of latitude and longitude that once seemed so solid now wavering, almost shimmering like heat haze above asphalt. You start to see them not as fixed truths, but as wisps of human invention, ghosting over the curve of our planet. And if those foundational lines can be so malleable, so open to interpretation, imagine what happens when we start splashing them with pigment, slathering on the hues of human meaning. This is where the quiet deception deepens, where the map transforms from a mere depiction into a subtle, persuasive whisper in your ear. You pick up a map, perhaps one of those brightly colored wall charts from your school days. It's a riot of greens and browns and blues, punctuated by sudden bursts of red or yellow. Instinctively, your brain translates these shades into meaning. Blue, water. Green, forests, lowlands, perhaps just land that isn't desert. Brown, mountains, highlands. It seems so natural, doesn't it? So self-evident, but pause for a moment. Close your eyes and then reopen them, looking at the map with fresh, slightly cynical eyes. Is the ocean always blue? Is a forest always that particular shade of vibrant green? Or is it sometimes a muted, dusty olive? The answer, of course, is no. These colors are not reflections of reality. They are carefully chosen codes, symbols designed to guide your perception, to tell you a story about what you're seeing, often without you even realizing it. Consider the humble green. On many topographic maps, it signifies vegetation. Healthy, lush, sometimes even profitable vegetation. But if you've ever flown over a truly dense jungle, a place where the canopy is so thick it looks like broccoli from 30,000 feet, you'd know that green can also mean impassable, unyielding, or downright terrifying. A map showing vast swathes of green might subtly imply fertility and potential, drawing your eye to areas ripe for development, or perhaps exploitation. It's the difference between a cheerful "look, trees" and a more accurate warning. Here be things that want to eat you. You probably won't survive a full day in that kind of green without a very good guide, or at least a map that uses a different color for impenetrable death trap. Then there's the political map, a carnival of nations, each painted in its own distinct pastel or primary hue. One country might be a cheerful yellow, another a stoic purple, a third a fiery red. Why those colors? Is it random? Rarely. These choices are steeped in history and often in psychological manipulation. During the height of the British Empire, for instance, it became a common cartographic convention to depict British territories in a bright, unmistakable red or pink. You'd see a map of the world, and vast sections of it would be awash in this assertive, almost aggressive color. It wasn't just about differentiation. It was about visual dominance, a constant, subliminal reminder of the empire's vast reach. Imagine looking at such a map as a child, seeing half the globe bathed in a single, powerful color. It subtly reinforced the idea of British might, of a natural order where Britannia ruled the waves, and, well, a good chunk of the land, too. It was a cartographic mic drop, rendered in crimson. But it's not just about empire. Maps use color to delineate everything from population density to rainfall, from economic activity to geological features. A lighter shade of blue might mean shallow water, a darker blue, deep ocean trenches. Red might denote high temperature or high conflict zones. Yellow might mean desert or, conversely, highly developed urban areas. The meaning isn't inherent in the color itself. It's a learned association, an agreed-upon convention that can be, and often is, bent to serve a particular narrative. Think about a city subway map. These are masters of symbolic shenanigans. They don't represent geographical distance accurately. You remember how we talked about scale and how much has to be left out. Instead, they use a simplified, almost abstract, color-coded spaghetti of lines. Each line has its own distinct color. The red line, the blue line, the green line. This isn't just to make it pretty. It's to make a bewildering network instantly comprehensible. You don't need to know the exact angles or curves. You just need to know that if you want to get to the art museum, you take the bright yellow line. These colors become shorthand for entire journeys, reducing complex spatial relationships to easily digestible visual cues. It's a miracle of usability, but also a stark reminder that what you're seeing is a highly curated, highly symbolic interpretation of reality, optimized for a specific purpose. If you tried to use a geographically accurate map to navigate a subway, you'd probably miss your stop and end up in a parallel dimension, or at least a very confused transfer point. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of specific color conventions, like blue for water and green for land, was a spontaneous global consensus, or a more deliberate, top-down imposition by influential cartographic societies and publishers. Early maps often depicted water as white or gray, and land in a uniform, uncolored tone, sometimes with rudimentary topographical shading. The shift to a more universally recognized color palette was a gradual process, but once established, it became incredibly powerful. Consider also the use of white or blank spaces on a map. Sometimes this simply means no data available, but other times, especially in historical contexts, it marked terra incognita, unknown land. This was a cartographic confession of ignorance, but it also served as an invitation for exploration or perhaps conquest. A blank space on a map wasn't just empty. It was a void waiting to be filled, often with the colors of expansion and empire. Even the smallest symbols carry weight. That tiny airplane icon, airport, the little knife and fork, restaurant, a cross, church or hospital, depending on context. These seemingly innocuous pictograms are a universal language, allowing us to quickly interpret a map without needing a lengthy legend. But even these are choices, a decision to prioritize certain types of information over others. A map focused on tourist attractions will have different symbols than one designed for military maneuvers or for geological surveying. Each symbol is a tiny, loaded question. What is important for you to see here? The answer is always shaped by the map maker's intent. So, as you drift off, remember that even the most innocent-seeming splashes of color, the tiniest of symbols, are part of the map's gentle, pervasive deceit. Street view skew, city's soul. We'll examine how urban maps simplify the sprawling, chaotic reality of a city, focusing on specific elements. You're standing on a digital street corner, gazing at your phone's screen, a perfectly rendered, flat representation of the metropolis around you. The map shows neat, uniform blocks, precise angles, and roads that seem to stretch endlessly in clean, unblemished lines. It's a city distilled, purified, and presented for your easy consumption. But then you lift your eyes, and the sheer, glorious, sometimes terrifying mess of reality washes over you. The map, bless its organized little heart, has been lying to you just a little. Not out of malice, of course, but out of necessity. It has to simplify, to generalize, to smooth over the edges of a place that is anything but smooth. Think about the roads themselves. On your map, they're pristine arteries, connecting points with logical precision. On the ground, however, you're navigating a symphony of honking taxis, delivery trucks double-parked, cyclists weaving through impossible gaps, and pedestrians like yourself, jaywalking with an almost spiritual conviction. That perfectly straight line on the map. In reality, it's a slalom course of temporary construction barriers, an unexpected street market spilling onto the pavement, or a sudden, mysterious detour because someone forgot to mention that half the block is being dug up for an emergency pipe repair. The map promises directness. The street delivers an adventure, usually involving a surprising amount of scaffolding. And what about the buildings? Your map shows their footprints, neat little rectangles and squares, occasionally a triangle if the city planners were feeling particularly avant-garde. But these silent, two-dimensional shapes give you absolutely no sense of the soaring skyscrapers that block out the sun, or the charming, dilapidated brownstones huddled together like old friends. They don't convey the peeling paint on a forgotten facade, the vibrant street art adorning a grimy brick wall, or the hidden courtyards tucked away behind nondescript entrances, echoing with the sound of distant chatter. A map won't tell you about the secret rooftop gardens, the speakeasies hidden behind unmarked doors, or the exact number of pigeons perched precariously on a particular gargoyle, judging your life choices. Honestly, it's a blessing it doesn't. You probably wouldn't survive the existential dread. The map also conspicuously omits the human element, which, let's be honest, is the very soul of a city. It shows you the skeletal structure, but not the pulsing, breathing organism it houses. It doesn't show the throngs of commuters spilling out of subway stations during rush hour, moving with an almost terrifying, synchronized purpose. It doesn't show the street performers captivating small crowds with gravity-defying feats, the vendor shouting about the freshness of their hot pretzels, or the quiet intimacy of two friends sharing coffee on a bustling sidewalk cafe. The map tells you where the park is, but not the laughter of children echoing from the playground, the determined stride of a jogger, or the elderly couple slowly walking hand in hand. A lifetime of stories etched into their every step. Urban maps are a stage without actors, a score without an orchestra. Consider how maps simplify density. A block on a map looks uniform, but in a real city, that block could house anything from a sprawling office complex to a labyrinthine network of narrow alleys, forgotten workshops, and micro-apartments stacked precariously high. These are the desire paths of urban life, the unofficial shortcuts, the hidden passages that only locals know. They're the cracks in the map's perfect veneer, the places where the city truly breathes and surprises you. A fringe tidbit here. Some cartographers have actually tried to map these desire paths. The unofficial shortcuts people take across parks or through city blocks, acknowledging that the actual foot traffic often deviates wildly from the paved, mapped walkways. These unofficial paths are a testament to human ingenuity and impatience, and they're almost universally absent from official city maps, deemed irrelevant or simply too chaotic to represent. Historically, urban mapping has always been an exercise in simplification, but also in assertion. When Baron Haussmann undertook his ambitious, sweeping renovation of Paris in the mid-19th century, he essentially imposed a new map onto an old city. He sliced through the medieval tangle of narrow streets, creating the wide boulevards and grand avenues we recognize today. This was not just about aesthetics. It was about control, about allowing for quicker troop movements to quell uprisings, and about asserting the power of the state. He didn't map Paris as it was. He mapped Paris as he wanted it to be, and then made it so. This mainstream historical fact reminds us that maps can be blueprints for forced change, not just reflections of existing reality. Historians still argue whether Haussmann's radical urban surgery preserved the soul of Paris or irrevocably altered it, trading organic charm for strategic efficiency. Some say he sanitized the city, others claim he simply made it functional for a modern age. Even the names on the map are a form of simplification. A street name like Main Street or Market Square might seem innocuous, but it often glosses over centuries of changing identities, forgotten historical figures, or a specific, perhaps less than glamorous, industry that once defined that area. It's like calling your eccentric Aunt Auntie, when her full name is something wonderfully convoluted and tells a much richer story. The map gives you the nickname, not the biography, so the next time you rely on an urban map, whether it's for navigation or just for curiosity, remember its gentle deception. It's a tool, a brilliant abstraction designed to help you navigate, but never to truly know a place. To know a city, you have to embrace its chaos, its hidden corners, its unexpected smells. Yes, even the ones you probably won't survive with your nose intact, and the vibrant, unpredictable pulse of the people who call it home. The map might show you the bones, but the city itself is the beating heart, the wild, untamed spirit that refuses to be confined to neat lines and predictable labels. It's a joyful, overwhelming, often baffling reality that no two-dimensional representation can ever truly capture. You stand at the railing, the wind whipping salt spray into your face, and you gaze out at a world that seems to defy definition. Before you stretches an endless expanse of shifting, swirling blue, a liquid canvas that constantly redraws itself. Where do you put a line on a map when the very surface itself refuses to hold still? This isn't like plotting a mountain range, solidly rooted for millennia, or even a city with its stubbornly fixed buildings. The ocean, you see, is the ultimate shape-shifter, and trying to pin it down on a piece of paper is like trying to sketch a cloud in a hurricane. It's a magnificent, terrifying realm, and honestly, if you ever find yourself adrift without a GPS, a working radio, and a decent chart, your chances of a quick rescue are probably slimmer than a kraken's chances of winning a spelling bee. Think about it. A map at its core is a set of fixed points, a grid, a series of immovable landmarks. But what landmarks does the open ocean offer? A ripple here, a wave crest there, a fleeting patch of sunlight reflecting off the surface. It's like trying to navigate a featureless desert. Only this desert is perpetually in motion, often featureless, and occasionally tries to swallow you whole. Early mariners, brave souls that they were, faced this deception head-on. Their maps, often drawn from fragmented accounts and sheer guesswork, were magnificent tapestries of hope and fear, dotted with fanciful sea monsters just to fill the terrifying void of the unknown. Remember how we talked about colonial cartography, imposing order on land? Well, mapping the sea was an entirely different beast. You couldn't just plant a flag and declare ownership of a current. The challenge wasn't just about surface features. It was about the unfathomable depths. How do you represent a three-dimensional body of water on a two-dimensional map? You can't just draw a line and say, "Here be dragons, and also the bottom is really, really far down." Early attempts at sounding the ocean floor involved dropping weighted lines, a practice that, to this day, makes you wonder if anyone ever thought of tying a really, really long piece of string to a really, really heavy rock and just seeing what happened. This rudimentary technique only provided isolated depth points, leaving vast, unseen abysses and towering underwater mountains as mere speculation. It wasn't until the late 19th century, with expeditions like the HMS Challenger, that systematic deep-sea soundings began to reveal the true, complex topography of the ocean floor, a landscape more varied and dramatic than any on land. This was a mainstream historical fact that fundamentally reshaped our understanding of the planet, proving that what lay beneath the waves was anything but flat. And then there's the dynamic nature of coastlines. You might think of a coastline as a hard, unyielding boundary between land and sea, but it's more of a suggestion, isn't it? Tides ebb and flow, constantly redefining where the land ends and the ocean begins. Erosion gnaws away at cliffs, storms reshape sandy beaches overnight, and deltas build new land from river sediment. A map, by necessity, freezes this constant dance, presenting a single, static snapshot of a volatile reality. So, if you're using a map from even a few decades ago to navigate a rapidly eroding shoreline, you might find yourself wading into what your map confidently declares is solid ground. It's a subtle lie born of necessity, but a lie nonetheless. Consider the sheer lack of fixed reference points. On land, you have mountains, rivers, cities, even individual trees or peculiar rock formations to help you orient yourself. At sea, once you lose sight of land, you're in a world without anchors, literal or metaphorical. For centuries, determining longitude at sea was the holy grail of navigation, a problem so vexing it led to immense prizes and countless lost lives. Remember how we discussed the grid of latitude and longitude as a human construct. On land, you can triangulate your position relative to known points. Out in the vastness, without a reliable way to measure longitude, your fixed grid became a theoretical exercise, your position a best guess. It wasn't until the invention of the chronometer, a highly accurate clock that could keep Greenwich Mean Time, that sailors could finally calculate their longitude with any precision, transforming maritime navigation from a terrifying gamble into a predictable science. Before that, map details beyond sight of land were largely educated guesses, or more colorfully, educated guesses with a side of, here be mermaids doing synchronized swimming. But even with modern technology, mapping the ocean remains a colossal undertaking, riddled with its own brand of deception. Satellites can map the sea surface with incredible detail, showing currents and wave heights, but they can't see through the water to the bottom. For that, you need sonar, sending sound waves down and listening for the echoes. But sonar mapping is slow, expensive, and limited by the depth and clarity of the water. As a result, vast swathes of the ocean floor remain largely unmapped, some areas less known than the surface of Mars. This leads to the quirky tidbit that many of the mountains and valleys on our ocean floor maps are still, to this day, based on interpolated data, educated guesses, or extrapolations from sparse sonar readings. We've got more precise maps of Jupiter's moons than we do of some parts of our own deep ocean. So, when your map shows a pristine underwater ridge, it might actually be a jagged, complex geological formation that's only been roughly sketched in by a computer algorithm. And let's not forget the creatures of the deep, both real and imagined. Old maps, as you might recall, were fond of illustrating unknown waters with terrifying sea monsters, filling the void with fearsome imagery. While we've largely replaced kraken and leviathans with depth contours and shipping lanes, the ocean still holds secrets that modern maps can't capture. For instance, how do you map the immense migrations of whales, or the ephemeral blooms of bioluminescent plankton that can light up entire stretches of water. These are significant features of the ocean, yet they elude the cartographer's pen because they are dynamic, unpredictable, and rarely stay put for a formal survey. Historians still argue whether early Polynesian navigators truly used wave patterns and the flight paths of specific birds as precisely as modern reenactments suggest, or if a fair bit of ancestral wisdom and an uncanny sense of intuition, unmappable by any modern tool, played a much larger role in their incredible voyages across the Pacific. So the next time you look at a crisp blue map of the world's oceans, remember the silent deceptions it contains. It lies about the stability of the coast, the precise contours of the unseen depths, the fleeting nature of currents, and the sheer, unbridled chaos of a liquid world. It's not lying maliciously, of course, but out of necessity, simplifying an impossibly complex, ever-changing reality into something we can grasp, something we can use to navigate, something that lets us pretend we understand the immense, fluid heart of our planet. It's a map that says, "Here be water," when what it really means is, "Here be mysteries, movements, and a million subtle shifts we can't possibly draw for you." You're standing on the edge of a vast, undulating landscape, a grand symphony of peaks and valleys stretching as far as your sleepy eyes can see. But wait, you're not really there, are you? You're tucked in your bed, listening, and that's precisely the magic and the monumental headache of topographic maps. How on earth do you take this magnificent, crinkled, lumpy reality, this genuine, honest-to-goodness, three-dimensional world, and squish it flat onto a piece of paper without losing its very soul? It's a bit like trying to capture the essence of a perfectly roasted marshmallow on a flat photograph. You get the idea, but you miss the glorious, gooey, slightly charred truth. The ingenious, yet ultimately imperfect, answer lies in a cartographer's bag of tricks, primarily the humble contour line. Imagine you're gently filling the world with water, rising steadily, 1 meter at a time. Each time the water level meets the land, tracing a perfect, unbroken line around a hill or through a valley, that's a contour line. If you could see these phantom water lines from above, they'd give you a flat, two-dimensional snapshot of a three-dimensional world. Close lines mean steep slopes. Think of trying to climb a wall, or perhaps more accurately, trying to push a stubborn shopping cart up a ramp that feels like a mountain. Wide apart lines. That's gentle, rolling countryside, the kind of place where you could easily get lost in a contemplative wander, perhaps forgetting where you parked your imaginary car. But here's the kicker. These lines, while brilliant, are still abstractions. They tell you how high a point is, but not always how it feels to be there. They don't tell you about the loose scree underfoot, the biting wind whipping around a summit, or the sudden, terrifying drop-off that, on a map, just looks like two contour lines getting a bit cozy. In fact, if you tried to navigate some truly treacherous mountain terrain relying solely on closely spaced contour lines without any other visual cues, well, you probably won't survive this. Just kidding. Mostly. But you'd certainly have an exceptionally bad day, perhaps featuring an unplanned, rapid descent. Before contour lines became the standard, cartographers employed a wonderfully artistic, if less precise, technique called hachures. Picture tiny, delicate lines, almost like little brush strokes, drawn down the steepest gradient of a slope. Denser lines meant steeper terrain. A lighter touch suggested a gentler incline. It looked beautiful, like a fine engraving, and it gave you an immediate, intuitive sense of relief. But numerical accuracy? Not so much. It was more about evoking the feeling of a mountain range than pinpointing its exact elevation. It's like comparing a highly detailed, hand-drawn portrait to a pixel-perfect digital photo. Both capture a likeness, but in entirely different ways. Then came the marvel of shaded relief, a technique that truly brings the topography to life, even if it's still fundamentally a lie. Imagine a light source, typically placed in the upper left corner of the map, casting imaginary shadows across the terrain. Hills on the left would be brightly lit, while their opposite slopes would fall into shadow, creating a visual depth that practically makes the mountains pop off the page. It's an illusion, of course. The light isn't real, the shadows aren't real, but your brain perceives them as real, allowing you to instantly grasp the topography. It's the same trick artists use to make flat drawings look three-dimensional, just applied to a vast geographical canvas. This innovation, popularized by Swiss cartographers like Eduard Imhoff in the 20th century, revolutionized how we visualize terrain, making maps far more intuitive for the average user. Now here's a quirky tidbit for you. Before these sophisticated techniques, some early maps depicted mountains as little molehills or jagged teeth, often drawn in profile, sticking up from the flat map surface. They weren't accurate representations of height or shape, but more like symbolic markers saying, "Hey, there's a big bumpy bit over here, probably best to go around." It's adorable in its simplicity, but utterly useless for, say, planning an actual ascent or figuring out if you're about to tumble into a ravine. Imagine using one of those maps to climb Everest. You'd be in for a surprise. The inherent problem, of course, is that a map is a projection, a flattening. When you try to flatten a curved surface, you always introduce distortions. Think of peeling an orange and trying to lay its skin perfectly flat without tearing or stretching it. You can't. Something has to give. In topographic maps, this giving manifests as a compromise between showing accurate elevation and maintaining true distances or areas. Historians still argue whether the development of highly accurate topographic maps, with their detailed contour lines and precise elevations, was driven more by military necessity, knowing exactly where to position troops and artillery, or by the burgeoning scientific curiosity of the Enlightenment, seeking to precisely measure and categorize every inch of the natural world. It's probably a bit of both, isn't it? Like most human endeavors, pragmatism and intellectual pursuit often walk hand in hand, even if one occasionally trips the other. So, while you might trace a finger along those elegant contour lines, feeling like you understand every undulation of the land, remember that it's a magnificent lie, a necessary fiction. Those lines are perfectly smooth, but the reality of a mountain path is rough, uneven, and often strewn with rocks that seem specifically designed to trip you. The shaded relief gives you a sense of light and shadow, but it doesn't tell you about the thick fog that can descend without warning, turning a perfectly legible map into a cruel joke. The map offers the blueprint, but the world provides the messy, glorious, unpredictable reality. It's an invitation to imagine, to plan, but also a gentle reminder that the true adventure begins where the map ends, or perhaps where its elegant deceptions give way to the raw truth of the earth beneath your feet. You close your eyes, and a shimmering blue line traces itself across the dark canvas of your mind. It's the familiar path, a digital breadcrumb trail leading you home, or to that obscure coffee shop your friend raves about. You trust it implicitly, don't you? This magical voice in your pocket, calmly guiding you through tangled urban mazes and along quiet country lanes, feels like the very embodiment of truth. It knows all, sees all, and whispers the precise turn you need to make in 100 feet. But lean a little closer and listen carefully, because even this sleek, all-knowing oracle, this beacon of supposed certainty, carries its own quiet deceptions. It too, just like those ancient parchment scrolls and colonial reimaginings, quietly lies. Just a little. Imagine yourself navigating a bustling city, skyscrapers towering above you like metallic giants, their reflective surfaces playing tricks with the very signals you rely on. Your GPS, that tireless digital co-pilot, is listening for faint whispers from satellites orbiting thousands of miles above, each one broadcasting its precise position and a timestamp. It's trying to triangulate your exact spot on Earth, an impressive feat by any measure. But in this concrete jungle, those whispers bounce. They reflect off glass facades, they penetrate buildings, they get confused. Your phone thinks you're still on Main Street, but you've actually just turned onto Elm. It's a phantom shuffle, a digital dance where your little blue dot drifts and wobbles, sometimes even appearing on the wrong side of the road. You've probably seen it, that moment of delightful confusion as your GPS insists you take a U-turn right into a bus stop. Oh, the sheer joy! This isn't malice, it's simply physics at play. The signals trying to reach you are instead doing an accidental game of digital pinball. And it's not just the cityscape. Drive deep into a leafy forest, under a canopy so thick it might as well be a blanket, and your GPS struggles. The leaves, the branches, the very moisture in the air can scatter those precious satellite signals, weakening them, delaying them. Suddenly, your precise location becomes a fuzzy approximation. You're not quite here, not quite there. It's like trying to have a conversation through a dozen closed doors. Or, worse, trying to find your car in a packed shopping mall parking lot when you swear you parked it right here, but your phone shows you 3 aisles over. The digital world, for all its sophistication, still bumps up against the messy reality of our physical one. Now, let's rewind a bit, to a time when these digital whispers were intentionally made fuzzy. For years, up until May 2000, the United States military, which controls the GPS satellite network, deliberately introduced what they called selective availability. This was a purposeful degradation of the civilian GPS signal, making it less accurate for everyday users, ensuring that only military and authorized government entities had access to its full, pinpoint precision. Imagine trying to find a treasure buried 10 feet away, but being told it's somewhere in a 100-foot radius. It was a fascinating, if frustrating, example of how power can subtly manipulate even seemingly objective technological data. Historians still debate the full long-term economic and social impact of this period of intentional imprecision, pondering whether it truly stifled innovation or merely delayed it. Beyond the satellite signals themselves, the very maps you see on your screen are products of immense, but still imperfect, data collection. Google's Street View cars, for instance, are constantly crawling the globe, capturing images and mapping roads. But what happens when a new subdivision pops up, or an old road is decommissioned? It takes time, sometimes a surprisingly long time, for these updates to trickle down into the digital map you hold in your hand. You might find yourself on a road that is now a private driveway, or staring at a field where your map swears there's a thriving mini-golf course. This lag is a form of digital amnesia, a momentary forgetfulness built into the system. And then there's the art of omission, a lie by convenience. Digital maps, just like their paper ancestors, must decide what to show and what to hide. Is every single tiny alleyway necessary? What about every single tree, every single fire hydrant? Of course not. The algorithms make choices, simplifying complex reality into digestible pathways. They prioritize major thoroughfares, landmarks, and points of interest. This isn't inherently wrong, but it means the complete picture is never truly complete. It's a carefully curated experience, designed for navigability, not for comprehensive truth. You're presented with a streamlined version of reality, where the messy details are gently smoothed over. It's like those perfectly filtered selfies. Technically you, but maybe a slightly less wrinkled version. Sometimes these omissions or outdated data sets can lead to truly bizarre outcomes. There are countless tales of drivers, trusting their digital overlords implicitly, driving straight into lakes, off-boat ramps, or down non-existent logging trails. One famous incident saw a woman follow her GPS into a field, convinced the dirt track was a legitimate road, only to get thoroughly stuck. Her GPS, of course, calmly continued to insist she was en route. It's a testament to our profound trust in these glowing screens, a trust so deep you'd probably drive your car off a perfectly good cliff if a cheerful voice told you to. Now, you probably won't survive that particular navigation error, but it certainly puts the idea of unquestioning faith in technology into perspective, doesn't it? Think about the bias inherent in the algorithms that power your navigation. When you ask for the fastest route, what metrics are being used? Traffic speed, road conditions. Are they considering pedestrian safety or the environmental impact of the route? Often, these algorithms prioritize efficiency and speed above all else, sometimes leading you down narrow residential streets, much to the chagrin of the locals. Or, if you're searching for a restaurant, the map might subtly highlight establishments that have paid for premium placement, or those that have generated a certain level of positive reviews. It's not a conspiracy, but it is a subtle nudge, guiding your choices, shaping your perception of what's available and what's important. The map isn't just showing you the world, it's quietly suggesting how you should interact with it. Even something as seemingly objective as traffic data can be a dance of digital deceit. Your map shows a red line, indicating heavy congestion. You grumble, reroute, and suddenly, the red line vanishes as everyone else does the same. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, a ripple effect of collective obedience to an algorithmic suggestion. The very act of looking at the map changes the reality it attempts to depict. It's a dynamic, ever-shifting landscape of information, filtered through layers of sensors, data points, and complex computations, all striving for accuracy, but inevitably falling short in some nuanced way. So as you drift off, consider this. Your most trusted digital guide, the one that prevents you from getting hopelessly lost on a solo road trip, is still an interpreter. It takes a vast, complex, and constantly changing world, boils it down, simplifies it, and presents it to you with an air of absolute authority. It omits details, rounds corners, and occasionally, due to the sheer chaotic beauty of physics or the lingering ghost of old data, sends you on a wild goose chase. The digital map, for all its incredible power and convenience, still holds true to the age-old tradition of cartography. It tells you a beautifully convincing, highly functional, but never entirely, perfectly truthful story. It's a story designed to get you from A to B, not necessarily to reveal every single blade of grass or every hidden pothole along the way. Cognitive cartography, mind maps. You close your eyes for a moment just as the last echoes of digital dilemmas and GPS glitches fade into the twilight. Take a breath. Now imagine your own home. Not with Google Street View or a surveyor's precise laser scans, but entirely from memory. You can probably navigate it blindfolded, right? You know the exact number of steps from your bed to the bathroom, the creak in the third stair, the way the light filters through a specific window at dawn. This isn't a map printed on paper or displayed on a screen. This is your internal cognitive map, a complex, ever-evolving landscape etched into the very folds of your brain. It's the most personal map you'll ever possess, and perhaps the most charmingly inaccurate. Think about it. When you mentally plot your route to the nearest grocery store, do you visualize every single curve in the road, every parked car, every blade of grass? Of course not. Your mind simplifies. It highlights the crucial landmarks: the big oak tree, the unusually purple house, the traffic light that always seems to be red. Distances stretch and shrink based on your perception. That tedious 5-minute walk to the mailbox can feel like an eternity on a cold day, while a quick dash across town to meet a friend might feel like no time at all. Your emotional connection to a place profoundly distorts its representation in your mind. That terrifying alleyway you ran through once. In your mental map, it's probably a winding, endless labyrinth, even if it's just a 20-foot straight shot on an actual blueprint. This is where your mind, in its infinite wisdom, opts for personal narrative over precise geometry. A bit like that time you told your friend about your epic journey to the kitchen for a snack, when in reality it was 2 steps and a fridge door. You probably won't survive the next time you tell that story with such embellishment. Your friend will see right through it. Your cognitive map is a living, breathing entity, constantly being redrawn with every new experience. The first time you visit a new city, your mental map is a skeletal thing, just a few main roads and prominent buildings. But as you explore, as you get lost, and find yourself again, perhaps with the help of a kind stranger or a quick peek at your phone, as you discover that quaint coffee shop or that shortcut through the park, your map gains detail, nuance, and surprisingly more delightful inaccuracies. You might discover that the north you always imagined a particular street running actually turns slightly west. Or that the huge, imposing building you swore was 5 blocks away is, in fact, just around the corner. It's a bit like trying to draw a map of your dreams. You know the emotional landscape, but the spatial relations are, shall we say, fluid. This inherent flexibility allows your brain to quickly adapt to new information, rerouting you in an instant when a familiar path is suddenly blocked. It's incredibly efficient, even if it means sacrificing perfect geometric precision. Historically, before the advent of sophisticated cartography, human navigation relied almost entirely on these internal, cognitive maps, often augmented by verbal traditions and storytelling. Indigenous peoples around the world, from the Polynesian navigators who traversed vast oceans using intricate mental maps of currents, stars, and swell patterns, to Aboriginal Australians who sang their ancestral songlines, which served as oral maps of their vast territories, demonstrated an incredible mastery of spatial memory and environmental cues. These weren't just routes. They were rich tapestries of cultural knowledge, spiritual sites, and practical survival information woven directly into their understanding of the landscape. They didn't need a fancy GPS. They had millennia of accumulated wisdom downloaded directly into their collective memory, passed down through generations. Imagine trying to explain your morning commute using only a song. Okay, so you start on the "Oh, I Hate Mondays" melody, then hit the "Traffic Light Is Red Again" chorus, and finally, the "Coffee Please" bridge takes you to the office. It certainly adds a certain artistic flair, wouldn't you say? These mental maps are also deeply intertwined with our sensory experiences. The smell of freshly baked bread might anchor a bakery in your mind, even if you can't quite recall the street name. The sound of distant church bells might mark a specific district. This is why when you revisit a childhood neighborhood, certain smells or sounds can instantly transport you, triggering a flood of forgotten spatial memories. It's not just about where things are, but how they feel to you. A true cartographer would weep at the subjectivity, but your brain doesn't care about objective truth. It cares about your truth. It's busy predicting where you'll find the next coffee shop based on the aroma of roasted beans, or anticipating the crowded bus stop by the familiar drone of city traffic. These predictions, though often unconscious, are crucial to your everyday navigation, forming a kind of predictive map over the basic layout. One quirky tidbit reflecting this internal landscape is the phenomenon of cognitive tunneling or tunnel vision under stress. When highly stressed or focused on a task, your mental map of your surroundings can literally shrink, omitting peripheral details that aren't immediately relevant to your perceived goal. This is why someone rushing to catch a train might completely miss a new coffee shop or a giant, brightly painted mural they would otherwise notice. Your brain, in its efficiency, simply deletes the unnecessary information, making your internal map less expansive, more narrowly focused on the immediate task at hand. It's the ultimate express lane for your brain, but sometimes you miss the scenic route, or, the giant, flashing sign that says, "Don't forget your wallet." It's a survival mechanism, really, but one that sometimes makes you miss the subtle beauty or the unexpected detour that might have made your day just a little bit more interesting. Historians still argue whether the development of written maps spurred a more abstract and objective form of spatial reasoning in human societies, or if it merely formalized existing cognitive processes. Did we start thinking differently about space because we could draw it? Or did we draw it because we already thought about it in a certain way? It's the chicken or egg of cartography, endlessly debated in dusty university halls. What is clear, however, is that even with all the precise GPS coordinates and satellite imagery available today, your brain stubbornly continues to draw its own, uniquely personal and delightfully flawed maps. You might consult your phone for directions, but the underlying feel of a place, its subjective distances and emotional landmarks, remains deeply ingrained in your own head. And sometimes, that's all you really need to find your way home, even if home is just a feeling rather than a fixed point on a grid. Your mind's map, though never perfectly true to scale or cardinal direction, is perfectly true to you, guiding you through the intricate personal geography of your life. You're drifting, eyes half closed, through a gallery not of paintings, but of maps. Not the crisp, practical kind you pinch zoom on your phone, but scrolls unfurling with gilded edges, parchment yellowed by centuries, ink so vibrant it feels alive. Here, the lines aren't just boundaries, they're brushstrokes. The compass roses bloom like intricate flowers, and mythical beasts frolic in uncharted seas, their scales shimmering in the soft light. You can almost smell the faint scent of aged paper and distant spices. This isn't about getting from A to B. It's about experiencing A and B and everything in between as a feeling, a dream. You lean closer to one, tracing the delicate calligraphy of a legendary city that might only exist in the mind of its creator. You realize, with a slight chill down your spine, that if you actually tried to navigate the real world using some of these magnificent creations, you probably wouldn't survive past the nearest Starbucks. You'd be hopelessly, beautifully lost, swallowed by the artistic intentions of the cartographer. Consider the age of exploration, not just as a period of discovery, but as an explosion of artistic cartography. When you picture those grand, early world maps, often etched onto copper plates, then hand-colored with painstaking detail, you're not just seeing geography. You're witnessing a performance. These were expensive, prestigious objects, commissioned by wealthy patrons and powerful rulers. They were status symbols, declarations of ambition, and visual metaphors for dominion. The sheer artistry involved in their creation often overshadowed their functional accuracy. Imagine the master cartographer, hunched over his desk, not just plotting latitudes and longitudes, but meticulously drawing fantastical sea creatures, swirling currents, ships with billowing sails, and elaborate, allegorical scenes in the margins. You see Neptune, trident in hand, riding a chariot pulled by hippocampi, or cherubs puffing out the winds from the corners of the globe. This was a period where decorative cartography flourished, especially during the 16th and 17th centuries, merging scientific pursuit with artistic grandeur. A mainstream historical fact you often overlook amidst the talk of explorers and new routes. And speaking of grandeur, remember how the colonial cartographers, with their power's pen, drew borders that served their own agendas. Well, the artistic cartographers did something similar, but with beauty as their alibi. They weren't necessarily trying to deceive politically, but they were certainly willing to bend geographical reality for aesthetic impact. A coast might be simplified, a mountain range exaggerated, or a river straightened, all for the sake of a more pleasing composition. It was less about telling a factual story and more about evoking a feeling, a sense of wonder, or even a specific national identity. Take the Mappa Mundi from the Hereford Cathedral, for instance. It's a quintessential quirky or fringe tidbit. Dating back to around 1300, this enormous map isn't about navigation in any modern sense. It's a Christian theological diagram depicting the world as a disk with Jerusalem at its center. You find Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, mythical beasts like the unicorn and the phoenix, and biblical stories illustrated across the continents. The geography is suggestive at best. Rivers flow where they shouldn't, continents are disproportionate, and the overall message is salvation history, not practical directions to, say, medieval Worcester. It's a map that lies not because it's inaccurate, but because its truth is entirely different, a spiritual and allegorical truth. Trying to find your way to medieval Paris using the Hereford map would be like trying to pay your taxes with a bag of glitter. Visually appealing, but utterly useless for its intended purpose. This brings us to a fascinating scholarly debate. Just when does a map stop being a map and start being pure art? Historians still argue whether these highly stylized, conceptually driven creations should even be classified under cartography, or if they belong more squarely in the realm of fine art or historical illustration. Is a map of a fictional land from a fantasy novel, painstakingly detailed and beautifully rendered, still a map, if that land only exists in imagination? Or what about the countless artistic interpretations of cityscapes, where the artist distorts perspective, exaggerates landmarks, or even creates entirely new narratives within the urban fabric? These are maps of feeling, maps of memory, maps of desire, rather than maps of measurable space. They are maps that ask you to feel the city, not just locate its train station. You see this personal expression everywhere, especially in contemporary art. Artists today often use the visual language of maps' lines, grids, symbols to explore completely non-geographical ideas. Emotional landscapes, social networks, historical events, even personal relationships. Imagine a map where the distance between 2 points represents not physical mileage, but the intensity of a friendship. Or a map of a conversation, where the lines show tangents and the symbols mark moments of laughter or disagreement. These aren't precise, they're profoundly expressive. They communicate truths about human experience that a topographical map never could, because they're not bound by the cold, hard facts of elevation and coordinates. They prioritize beauty, yes, but also conceptual depth and raw, subjective emotion. The beauty of these artistic alibi maps is that their lies aren't accidental. They're intentional, deliberate choices made to serve a higher purpose, be it aesthetic pleasure, spiritual instruction, or emotional resonance. They don't pretend to be objective truths. Instead, they embrace their subjectivity, offering you a different kind of reality. And in a world obsessed with precision and data, there's something incredibly refreshing about a map that simply wants to be beautiful, or to make you think, or even just to make you chuckle. It's like discovering that your strict geography teacher secretly painted abstract art in their spare time. A delightful subversion of expectation. You might not be able to plot a direct course on it, but you can certainly lose yourself in its intricate details, discovering a different kind of truth. Think about those old carta figures from the 17th century. Maps with decorative borders crammed full of portraits of explorers, allegorical figures, and ethnographic vignettes of distant peoples, often depicted through a highly European, sometimes prejudiced, lens. The geographical information, while present, was often secondary to the visual feast of the border. It was a package deal, a little bit of information wrapped in a whole lot of artistic flair. You weren't just buying a map. You were buying a piece of intellectual and artistic furniture, something to impress your dinner guests who, let's be honest, probably couldn't point to half the places on the map anyway. It was the equivalent of today's designer coffee table books, more for show than for rigorous study. And honestly, who can blame them? A plain map, however accurate, simply doesn't have the same visual punch as one adorned with sea monsters and cherubs. The beauty of these maps is that their inaccuracies become part of their charm, part of their story. They reflect the worldview, the technology, and the artistic sensibilities of their time. They are not failures of precision, but triumphs of imagination. When you look at one of these masterpieces, you're not judging it by how well it gets you to your destination, but by how well it transports you to another era, another way of seeing the world. It's a quiet conversation across centuries, where the mapmaker whispers, "Here, look at my vision, my interpretation, my art." And as you slowly drift into slumber, you realize that even a map, that seemingly objective guide, can be a canvas for dreams. Future forecasts, predictive lies. You lean closer to the map, not of what is, but of what might be. It shimmers with probabilities, a digital crystal ball, or perhaps a particularly ambitious weather forecast. You've seen the cone of uncertainty, that widening smudge on the news where the hurricane might go. A chaotic ballet of computer models and atmospheric pressure. That, my friend, is a map lying, not maliciously, but nervously, like a diligent student who knows they didn't quite study enough for the pop quiz on global air currents. These are predictive maps, and they exist in a thrilling, terrifying space where cartography meets clairvoyance, trying to chart a future that hasn't happened yet. And just to add a sprinkle of existential dread to your slumber, if you're ever looking at a map predicting the exact trajectory of a truly rogue asteroid heading for your living room, well, you probably won't survive this particular forecast. So enjoy the last few moments of blissful ignorance. Think of those sprawling urban planning maps, dotted with future parks and phantom highways. They're built on stacks of assumptions about population growth, economic shifts, and whether people will really embrace electric scooters or revert to riding unicycles everywhere. You see the vibrant green proposed for a new residential zone, or the bold red indicating a projected industrial expansion. But these are merely hypotheses solidified onto paper, a hopeful or perhaps fearful vision of tomorrow. The lines are solid, yes, but the reality they represent is as fluid as mercury. One economic downturn, one unexpected technological leap, or even a sudden shift in local avocado toast consumption habits, and that neatly planned future could unravel faster than a cheap sweater. Our ancestors were also keen on mapping the future, albeit through different lenses. While not always geographical in the modern sense, ancient cultures produced elaborate astrological charts that served as predictive maps of destiny, guiding everything from agricultural planting to royal succession. The Babylonian celestial maps, for instance, were intricate representations of planetary movements, believed to foretell events on Earth. You might scoff, but in their time, these were serious predictive tools, as earnestly consulted as any modern climate model. They were trying to map the unseen forces of the cosmos onto the unfolding narrative of human lives, believing the stars held the keys to tomorrow's harvest or tomorrow's war. It's a fascinating, if misguided, early attempt at creating a spatial representation of time itself. Then there are the maps that predict something far more tangible, yet equally elusive: the spread of disease. From John Snow's famous cholera map in London, which, while historical, laid the groundwork for understanding contagion, to modern epidemiological maps tracking pandemics. These are constantly evolving beasts. You see the hot spots intensify, the arrows indicating movement, the ominous gradient of red telling you where the next wave might crash. But these aren't static records. They're dynamic predictions based on current data, human behavior, and the whims of a virus. A sudden surge in travel, an unseasonable change in temperature, or just enough people deciding that personal hygiene is a recommendation rather than a rule, and the map's predictive power becomes a mere suggestion. It's like trying to map the movements of a flock of pigeons when half of them are wearing tiny jetpacks and the other half are just really confused. The subtle lies continue with maps of resource depletion or environmental change. You'll find maps showing projected sea level rise, swallowing coastlines and erasing islands, or maps illustrating the gradual retreat of glaciers. These are based on complex scientific models, fed by vast amounts of data, yet they are still predictions. The rate of change, the exact impact, the human response, these are all variables that introduce layers of uncertainty. You look at a map showing your favorite beach being underwater in 50 years, and it's a powerful image, but it's an image of a likely future, not a guaranteed one. There are inherent errors, not because the scientists are bad at their jobs, but because predicting a chaotic system like Earth's climate or human consumption habits is a bit like trying to predict what your cat will do next, only with more icebergs and significantly higher stakes. Sometimes, these predictive maps are used to anticipate human conflict. Military strategists have long used maps to model potential battlegrounds, enemy movements, and logistical challenges. You're looking at a map overlaid with red arrows showing enemy advances, blue arrows for your own forces, and dotted lines indicating potential skirmishes. These are not just representations of terrain. They are dynamic simulations of future engagements, attempts to game out possibilities before a single shot is fired. But human decision-making, the fog of war, and the sheer unpredictability of courage or cowardice can turn the most meticulously planned predictive map into a mere historical curiosity. Historians still argue whether certain predictive military maps from the Napoleonic Wars, for instance, were genuine tactical breakthroughs or simply retrospective justifications for decisions already made on the battlefield. Even your GPS, the ultimate arbiter of where you're going, uses predictive elements. It doesn't just show you where you are. It predicts the fastest route based on current traffic, speed limits, and even historical traffic patterns at that time of day. It's a wonderfully useful predictive map. But anyone who's been unexpectedly rerouted through a goat path because of a minor delay knows its predictions aren't infallible. It's a continuous, real-time forecast, constantly adjusting its probabilities based on new data, trying to guide you through a future that is always just a few seconds ahead of you. It's a map that whispers, "Trust me, I know what's coming." But occasionally it's whispering sweet nothings. Ultimately, these maps of the future, whether they chart climate, disease, urban sprawl, or asteroid trajectories, are profoundly honest in their dishonesty. They don't claim to be immutable truths written in stone. Instead, they are probabilities, possibilities, and calculated risks. They represent our best guesses, our most educated conjectures, laid out visually to help us prepare, adapt, or perhaps just to give us something to worry about while trying to fall asleep. They are projections, literally and figuratively, of what might be, reminding us that while we can map the past with some certainty, the future remains, and always will remain, a beautiful, sprawling blank canvas. You find yourself gazing at a map, not a crinkled paper one from your childhood adventures, but a sleek, glowing digital display. Perhaps it's a weather radar, swaths of green and yellow pulsating across the continent, promising rain or sunshine. Or maybe it's a shimmering visualization of population density, where cities glow like supernovas and rural areas fade into a peaceful, starry void. This isn't just about where things are, it's about what things are like. And here, my sleepy friend, is where maps truly begin to tell tales. We're stepping into the realm of thematic maps now, where the gentle deceptions of projection and scale give way to a more sophisticated kind of persuasion. You see, thematic maps aren't just showing you the world. They're showing you the world through a lens. They're like that friend who tells you a story, but strategically leaves out a few inconvenient details to make their point sound more convincing. And you, bless your trusting heart, are often none the wiser. In fact, if you just passively accept every thematic map you see without a healthy dose of skepticism, you probably won't survive the daily deluge of data without forming some rather skewed perspectives. Just a little heads up. Imagine a map showing income levels across a country. You see broad swaths of green for the wealthy and angry reds for the struggling. But how did those colors get there? Did the map maker just pick them at random? Oh, if only it were that simple. This is where the magic, or perhaps the mischief, of data classification comes in. There are half a dozen common ways to group data into these neat, digestible categories. You could use equal interval, which means each color range covers the same spread of values, say, $10,000 increments. Sounds fair, right? But what if most of your population huddles in the lower income brackets, and only a tiny few are truly wealthy? Then your map will show almost everyone in one or two poor colors. And the rich, colors will be rare, even if there are many gradations of wealth within that dominant group. It's like trying to describe a rainbow with only two crayons, light blurple and dark blurple. Not super helpful. Then there's quantiles, which slices the data so that each color category contains an equal number of geographic units, an equal number of counties, for instance. So the top 20% of counties by income get one color, the next 20% another, and so on. This method is brilliant at showing relative differences, ensuring every color gets its moment in the sun. But it can obscure the absolute differences. Two counties in the same color might have wildly different actual income levels, just because they're both, say, in the middle 20% of all counties. It's a bit like saying everyone who got between a C and a B+ on a test is average, even if one person scraped by and another nearly aced it. The nuances are lost in the color wash. And don't even get me started on natural breaks, or Jenks optimization, as the geeks call it. This method tries to find natural groupings in the data itself, minimizing the variance within each category and maximizing it between categories. It often produces a map that looks intuitively right to your eye, showing distinct patterns. But it's also the most subjective, relying on an algorithm to decide where the breaks naturally occur. It's like asking a really clever AI to sort your laundry by color, and it comes up with deep navy that's almost black, dark blue that's kind of purple, and blue that's just blue. Technically correct, but it's still its interpretation, not yours. This choice of classification method, often made by a cartographer you'll never meet, can drastically alter the story a map tells. A map showing crime rates, for example, could look alarming with one classification, and surprisingly calm with another, even using the exact same underlying data. A mainstream historical fact here is that this very challenge of data aggregation and representation was keenly felt by early cartographers in the 19th century, particularly as nations began to collect extensive demographic and economic statistics. They grappled with how to visually represent things like literacy rates, agricultural output, or disease prevalence across vast territories, often creating entirely new symbols and classification schemes on the fly. It was a cartographic Wild West. Consider the colors themselves. Are they warm reds and oranges, suggesting intensity or heat, or cool blues and greens, implying calm or abundance? The psychology of color is a potent tool in the cartographer's arsenal. A map of voter turnout, if colored in shades of vibrant red for high turnout and muted grays for low, will feel very different from one that uses optimistic greens for high turnout and sickly yellows for low. The very shades can prime your emotional response before you even read a single legend entry. It's a subtle nudge, a whisper in your subconscious, shaping how you perceive the truth of the data. And historians still argue whether the apparent objectivity of statistical mapping in the 19th century masked underlying biases in data collection, or the deliberate selection of visual parameters designed to push certain narratives, particularly regarding social reforms or colonial resource exploitation. Then there's the quirky tidbit of cartograms, remember those. Not just a cute trick, but a powerful example of data manipulation on a thematic map. Instead of the land area representing actual land, it gets distorted to represent a different value, like population or GDP. So a map of the world's population becomes a bulbous, distorted blob where India and China swell to gargantuan proportions, while Canada and Russia shrink to tiny, almost invisible slivers. Geographically inaccurate, yes, but thematically, profoundly illuminating. It drives home the point about human distribution in a way a standard map never could. But in its dramatic honesty, it also commits the ultimate cartographic sin. It totally abandons any pretense of accurate spatial representation. Your mental map of the globe, already a bit wonky from Section 2's projections, just got another workout. When you see a thematic map, whether it's tracking a pandemic, illustrating voting patterns, or showing the distribution of your favorite coffee shops, remember that someone made a choice. They chose the data to include, the way to classify it, the colors to use, and the scale at which to present it. Each of these decisions, however small, shapes the narrative. They're trying to tell you a story, and perhaps not the only story or even the full story. The map is a compelling argument, but arguments by their nature are selective. And that, my curious friend, is the subtle, often unseen way thematic truths can become delightful, data-driven distortions. You unfold the map. Perhaps it's one of those brightly colored tourist guides, creased from 1,000 previous unfoldings, or maybe a meticulously detailed hiking topo, crisp and new. Your fingers trace a line, a street, a contour. You see the names, the symbols, the promise of destination. But here's the curious truth, the quiet whisper the map keeps to itself. You're not just seeing the map. Oh no, dear listener. You are, in this very moment, reflecting your entire lived experience, your myriad biases, your personal history, onto that two-dimensional surface. You are, in essence, interpreting the world through the peculiar, utterly unique lens of you. And frankly, the sheer subjective weight of it all means you probably won't survive this intellectual deep dive without questioning every direction you've ever followed, every seemingly objective line you've ever trusted. Consider the simple act of navigating your own hometown on a map. For a stranger, it's a grid of streets, a smattering of parks, perhaps a few key landmarks. But for you, that specific intersection isn't just four corners. It's where you had your first car accident, or where you stumbled upon that incredible little bakery. That seemingly insignificant park isn't just a patch of green. It's where you learned to ride your bike, or had that awkward first date. Your best route to work isn't necessarily the shortest one the GPS barks at you. It's the one that avoids that one particular traffic light that takes forever, or the one that passes by your favorite coffee shop, regardless of a few extra minutes. Your mental map, the one you carry around in your head, is a vibrant, chaotic, deeply personal thing, utterly at odds with the pristine, objective version on paper. And when you look at that pristine map, your mind immediately begins to overlay it with your version, creating a delightful, if slightly delusional, hybrid. It's like trying to navigate a city using only Google Maps, but your phone keeps adding little pop-ups of all your embarrassing memories at every street corner. This isn't a new phenomenon, of course. For centuries, explorers and cartographers' personal perspectives didn't just influence maps. They were the maps. Think of the early world maps, often more theological treatises than geographical documents, placing Jerusalem at the absolute center, not because of its physical coordinates, but because of its spiritual significance to the mapmaker's faith. Or those delightful medieval maps where the edges of the known world were populated by terrifying sea monsters. Not because they'd actually seen a leviathan, but because the unknown was, for them, inherently monstrous and fearful. Their fears, their beliefs, their very cultural fabric, oozed onto the parchment, creating a worldview that just happened to also have some geographical features. It's a mainstream historical fact that the famous TO maps, popular in the Middle Ages, literally drew the world as a T inside an A, representing Asia, Europe, and Africa separated by the Mediterranean, Nile, and Don rivers, all within the encompassing ocean, and oriented with east, the direction of the Garden of Eden at the top. This wasn't about accurate projection. It was about reflecting a Christian worldview where the personal, or rather, the communal belief system, utterly dictated the perspective. This personal lens even extends to how you perceive the purpose of a map. To a city planner, a map of their metropolis is a tool for infrastructure development, traffic flow, and zoning. To a new immigrant, that same map is a guide to survival, a key to finding work, housing, and community. To a child, it's a treasure hunt, a path to the nearest ice cream parlor or playground. Each perspective overlays a different set of priorities, anxieties, and desires onto the same lines and symbols. It's why your partner can look at the same IKEA floor plan as you, and you both still end up lost in the bedding section, arguing about which way is north in Swedish furniture logic. Your cultural background, too, is a silent cartographer. The way you perceive distance, for example, can be deeply cultural. For some, a journey of 100 miles might seem vast, while for others, accustomed to expansive landscapes, it's merely a short jaunt. Even the colors and symbols on maps, which we discussed earlier, are interpreted through your personal lexicon of experience. A vibrant green might signify lush growth to one, but to another from a desert region, it might seem alien or even artificial. Speaking of personal paths, have you ever noticed those unofficial, trodden-down trails across a grassy field or a college campus? They're not on any official map, but they're there, worn into existence by countless individuals choosing the shortest, most convenient path, ignoring the paved walkways designed by planners. These are often called desire lines or social trails. They are a quirky, fringe tidbit of cartography, a tangible manifestation of collective personal bias overriding official design. It's almost like the landscape itself is submitting to the will of the people, saying, "Fine, you want to cut across? Be my guest." It reminds you of the subtle, unwritten maps that hobos or tramps once used, a network of personal symbols scratched onto fences and posts, indicating a friendly house, a dangerous dog, or a good place for a handout. These were maps understood only by a select few, an underground cartography born purely from personal experience and shared knowledge, reflecting a very specific and deeply subjective interpretation of the landscape's utility. Your emotional state also plays a trickster role. When you're stressed and rushing, every street on the map seems to coil and stretch, adding miles to your journey. When you're relaxed and exploring, even a long walk feels like a pleasant meander. The map hasn't changed, but your perception of its distances and challenges has warped. Just like the distorted landmasses on a Mercator projection we discussed earlier. But this time, the distortion is all in your head. Historians still argue whether the dominance of Eurocentric maps in the colonial era was primarily a tool of conscious manipulation, or an unconscious reflection of the cartographer's ingrained cultural biases. A mirror held up not just to the world, but to their own societal prejudices. Even the digital maps you rely on daily, those smooth, seemingly omniscient interfaces on your phone, are subject to your personal bias. When your GPS directs you down a narrow, unpaved road, your internal alarm bells ring because you know that road is a dead end for your car, or that it's notorious for potholes. The algorithm's best route might be mathematically optimal, but it doesn't account for your personal aversion to left turns across 3 lanes of traffic. or your desire to avoid that one particularly aggressive pigeon flock that always congregates near the bus stop. You're constantly editing and filtering the objective data through your own subjective, utterly charming, and occasionally wildly inaccurate internal map. It's why sometimes, despite the perfectly rendered streets and glowing blue line, you still feel profoundly, inexplicably lost. You stand now, perhaps in your mind's eye, at the very edge of the mapped world, not a physical precipice, but a philosophical one. You've journeyed through projections that squash and stretch, past lines of latitude and longitude that are mere human inventions, navigated borders that dance like shadows, and seen how color and symbol can bend your very perception. You've even peered into the peculiar distortions of your own mind map, realizing that the most trusted guide of all your internal compass is wonderfully, whimsically inaccurate. And yet, despite all these delightful deceptions, these little white lies on paper, you clutch that map. You trace its lines with a thumb, perhaps for a walk through a new city or a hypothetical trek across ancient plains. You're aware now that every single mark, every shade, every stylized tree is a compromise, a simplification, a decision made by a human hand, often centuries ago, imbued with all their biases and technological limitations. You understand that the perfect map, a true one-to-one representation, simply cannot exist. Attempting to create one would mean unfurling a map the size of the world itself, teeming with every leaf, every pebble, every single breath of wind. A map you probably won't survive trying to fold. It's an amusing thought, isn't it? Imagine trying to cram that into your glove compartment. But here's the quiet revelation, isn't it? These lies aren't malicious. They are, in fact, the very reason maps are so incredibly useful. Imagine trying to navigate by a map that showed every single blade of grass, every single stray dog, every single unswept dust bunny on your street. You'd be lost in the noise, paralyzed by detail. The map's inherent selectiveness, its deliberate omissions, its elegant distortions, are what transform a chaotic reality into an understandable, navigable guide. It's like a good friend who tells you exactly what you need to know, leaving out the tedious bits about their uncle's colonoscopy. Bless them. Consider the humble Mercator projection, that grand old villain of cartography, stretching Greenland to absurd proportions and making Canada look like a continent-sized ego booster. While it distorts landmasses terribly, it excels at preserving angles and shapes, which made it an absolute godsend for oceanic navigation in the age of sail. Sailors needed to plot straight courses by compass bearing, and for that, Mercator was king, even if it made them think they could sail from London to India in a single afternoon if only they had a tailwind. Historians still argue whether the early explorers fully grasped the extent of Mercator's distortions, or simply accepted it as a necessary evil for the sake of plotting a course, without sailing off the edge of the world, literally. It was a tool designed for a specific purpose, sacrificing one kind of truth for another. Even modern, hyper-accurate digital maps, the ones you tap on your phone, are performing countless invisible acts of simplification. They declutter, they prioritize, they filter based on your search query, or even your previous browsing history. When you zoom in on a park, it doesn't show you every fallen leaf or every squirrel burying a nut. It shows you the pathways, the benches, perhaps a pond. This selective rendering is not a flaw. It's a feature, designed to give you just enough information without overwhelming you. It's the digital equivalent of someone saying, "Don't worry about the existential dread, just focus on where the coffee shop is." Remember how we talked about cognitive cartography, your mind's own internal maps. Your mental map of your home, for instance, isn't a perfect blueprint. It's a network of emotional landmarks. The comfy armchair, the kitchen counter where you spilled crumbs, the spot where the cat usually sleeps. It prioritizes what's meaningful to you. Just as a public transit map prioritizes connections over geographical accuracy, or a hiking map prioritizes elevation changes over the precise location of every single rock. The beauty of a map, then, lies not in its perfect fidelity to reality, for that is an impossible dream, but in its humble utility. It's a guide, a storyteller, a memory keeper, and yes, a gentle deceiver. It invites you to fill in the gaps, to explore the unseen, to understand that the lines on paper are merely suggestions, an invitation to experience the richer, more complex reality that exists beyond its neat borders. Early cartographers, though often driven by political or economic motives, also held a deep reverence for the unknown, using the edges of their maps to denote mythological beasts or uncharted territories, a subtle acknowledgement of the world's grand mysteries beyond their limited knowledge. This isn't just about what they knew, but about what they gracefully admitted they didn't. They were, in essence, drawing a picture not just of what was, but of what might be or what could be imagined. It's a bit like a recipe that just says, a pinch of salt. It trusts you to understand the nuance. And so, as the final shadows stretch long and the world outside softens into quiet, you can let your thoughts drift from the rigid lines and vibrant hues of the maps we've explored. You've traveled far, not just across continents and oceans, but through layers of human intention, technological evolution, and the fascinating ways we try to capture something as immense and ever-changing as our world on a finite surface. Feel the gentle release of holding onto the notion of perfect accuracy, understanding that true perfection in mapping is a charming illusion, a beautiful impossibility. Instead, embrace the humble, guiding spirit of these visual stories. They are not absolute truths, but whispered suggestions, gentle nudges in the right direction. They are testaments to human ingenuity, our enduring desire to make sense of vastness, to orient ourselves, to find our way home. Think of them not as infallible blueprints, but as trusted companions, offering a hand in the twilight, leading you through the labyrinth of the world with kindness and a knowing wink. Let the images of swirling projections, of dotted lines and faded colors, now blend and blur like watercolors in a gentle rain. The world, in all its sprawling, magnificent, and beautifully imperfect reality, waits. And for tonight, the only journey you need to make is deeper into the soft stillness of your own peace. Close your eyes and let your mind's own map of comfort guide you now. Sweet dreams.